our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
All right, welcome people to The Narrative, episode 3. We've survived more than half a month, still on the air. Apparently, according to my co-host that's joining in a few minutes, I'm doing things wrong when it comes to streaming, but it's okay. We've still survived 2 weeks. This is the third. Welcome to the show. If you guys have watched the first 2 weeks, thank you very much. If you hit the thumbs up button, please keep doing that. Share the show out. On this show, if you're new here, we specialize in narrative warfare. I'm usually joined by a different info warrior every week to focus on sort of their area of expertise. And the whole goal here is to take seriously the refrain that many of us often talk about, but my personal framing of it is that we are in a war of stories. I take that very literally. I think that probably a lot more literally than even people I work with know, or even you folks know. I think stories run the world. I think a lot of people have really got on board with the power of narrative warfare to the point where a lot of the terms we've been using on Badlands for 2+ years, 3 years, are now just popping up in kind of normal mainstream media vernacular, trickling down into the alternative media, your Joe Rogans and all that kind of stuff. So, hey, this audience can pat yourselves on the back for some of that. Tonight, as we do the first couple weeks, people seem to like the format. We're going to do the story right now. We're going to talk about some current narratives that are at work in the info war. In the second half of the show, we're going to kind of do a deep dive on a more macro topic, a more esoteric topic that's not exactly tied into what's going on right now, although it also is that. And before we do, I want to introduce the sponsors for tonight's show. The first sponsor are our friends at EasyRx, who have a great deal for Badlanders. Tonight's show is brought to you by our partners at EasyRx. For more than 13 years, EasyRx has focused on your health by providing top-notch medications like amoxicillin, azithromycin, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and other viral care medications. The ordering process is simple and prices are unbeatable. Now is the perfect time to stock up on essentials for you and your family. If you want to rest assured that you and your loved ones are ready for anything, you need to go to badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx. Stock up on antibiotics and other necessary medications to keep you and your family healthy. Use the promo code BADLANDS for a 10% discount on purchases over $150. That's promo code BADLANDS for 10% off $150 orders or more. badlandsmedia.tv/EasyRx. Thank you very much to them. There have been, I'm sure everybody watching the show knows, a lot of people that are sick right now. They probably didn't put their EasyRx orders in soon enough. And our other sponsor of tonight's show are our new friends at Safe Streets.
Now's the perfect time to secure your home and your loved ones. Get a free ADT Smart Home Security System valued at $850 from ADT authorized provider, Safe Streets. Plus, a Google Nest doorbell camera at no cost and a $100 Visa gift card from Safe Streets. The most trusted name in home security with more than 106,000 4.9-star Trust Pilot reviews. Visit getsafestreets.com/Badlands or call 925-529-6541. That's 925-529-6541 to speak to a representative today. $99 customer installation charge and purchase of new monitoring service required. Early termination fees apply.
All right, thank you to our sponsors, EasyRx, Safe Streets. We got to be doing something right if we still have sponsors after 3 weeks. So that's good. And in terms of the third topic of the show, it's always you guys. So submit your Rumble rants, submit your Badlands boosts. The boost thing, we were having a little bit of trouble with it, but it looks all up to date. I checked on it, so I will get last week's boost when we get to that section, and I will get this week's boost. And without further ado, I'm going to be introducing, some would call him the first, some would call him the worst, some would call him both. But either way, it's the guy who's really interested in actuals and yet has written an extensive amount about narratives. And I think I might like the past version of him and the voice he was writing with a little bit more than the current version of him. So we're going to see if we can bring the past version of him back tonight. And that is none other than the other Kash Patel, John Harold.
What is up? That's a narrative we do not want to run with.
Yeah.
How's it going, man?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
Good.
The
Thank you for
kiddos to
having me.
sleep and everything.
I'm excited to see what the show's like. I haven't watched it yet, so figured I'd participate in it.
Nobody's really watched it. It's kind of in the dark corners of Badlands so far.
No, just kidding. I did watch your first episode, most of it. It was pretty good.
You know, it's been cool because obviously we do our Wednesday show. We've done a lot of streams together. But it's been cool. The first 2 episodes I went with people I don't usually stream with. And I was nervous about it because I'm trying to learn how to do this crap. And you do get a little distracted in a different way. I understand now the hosting thing, getting a little better at it. But what I really like about the show, especially since we're doing broad topics and narrative topics, is that you just mind meld totally differently when you switch up the hosts. Totally different flows.
Maybe I should switch up my Wednesday host so I can get some of that mind meld, you know?
Do a rotation. No. We don't want to do that. Yeah, so it's been great so far. And again, we do the Wednesday show, and I think one of the tricky things about when I was telling John about that I wanted to do the narrative, of course it didn't shock him, didn't shock anybody, that I wanted to do a show on narrative warfare. The tricky thing, I think, is as I'm finding a voice for this show and the co-hosts are helping me with that, we talk about narrative warfare a lot. Like, we talk about it on the Power Hour. We talk about it on every show, basically. Story Hour. Chris talks about it on Hindsight, etc. But I really want to focus on it. And I think by focusing on it, it allows us to not be tied into analyzing what's going on right now quite as closely. So it kind of lets you, and for you, your Devolution series is obviously something you've talked about a million times. And yet, I think we only sometimes touch on the narrative warfare aspects of the Devolution operation. We usually just touch on it as like a little aside. Like, hey, yeah, it's about the narrative, but let's get back into what's actually going on. But man, there's a lot of actual to the narrative warfare in the Devolution theory.
That's a great point, and a great way to put it too, because the whole thing is narrative warfare, but I feel like we almost, or maybe it's just me personally, but I almost find myself like having to rely on the actuals so much because I'm constantly trying to like show people that this is like a real thing. This is a real thing. And it's a real thing because of the actuals. But I would say 90, 95, 99% of what we're actually witnessing and what Devolution is the narrative stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's, and again, we've said that, like you've said that, like you wrote about it. You say it. But yeah, I think maybe that's the framing. That's going to be our second topic tonight. So as people who've watched the first couple shows, we try to do kind of the story right now that allows us to hit some of the stuff that's in the news right now and talk about it from a narrative warfare perspective. Second half of the show, I like to do kind of theme and thesis. Think of this stuff as stories. And tonight's theme, we named the episode Devolution, Evolution. And I kind of want to go back into, whether we go deep into the 2 articles in particular or not, John's part 22 and part 23 were my personal favorite Devolution articles for obvious reasons. They're all about narrative warfare. But I sort of want to just zoom out in that section and do a bit of a retrospective that obviously you couldn't do at the time. 2.5 years ago now, those were written in the middle of 2022, and kind of look at it from a narrative warfare perspective, and literally narrative warfare, not just the way I talk about it. But John's research lends a lot of credence to the idea that this was a very literal, direct, close to provable psychological operation. And do we think it worked? What's your early teaser? Do you think it has worked to the point where you thought it would at that time?
Well, yeah, I mean, Trump's back, he narratively won the election and he's narratively coming back. Okay. And that was kind of the end goal of what I thought Devolution was. And so, yeah, I'd say it worked. Now, I was definitely off on my timing of the whole thing, but yeah, Devolution, or what I think and this is another thing, like I don't even know if it really is devolution of what is taking place. Like we don't know if that's what they actually did, but there's some form of continuity of government. I think devolution maps onto what we see in the real world most accurately. I call it devolution. And I wasn't the first to do that. That was Thomas Wichter. But I think it's accurate. And I think it definitely worked. But we may not be right about everything. I don't know, man. That's a great question, though. Like, I haven't gone back ever and like thought about stuff from square one to now.
Yeah.
And like, when we talked about this before, I think we talked about it after Wednesday's show last week. You had said, I want to go through this, and like, do you think the story of devolution itself was like, was Ghost in the Machines involved in promoting it, or was it important? What affected just the story of the devolution theory have and all that stuff? And I think that's an interesting topic to get into as well. So I don't know if that's where you wanted this to go.
Yeah, exactly. That's and that's just going to be the second half, but I want to kind of tease people with it. The way you just worded it is a better way to word it. The story of devolution. And when I said that to John after Wednesday night, I said, I want to talk about that. And I like it being broad in this show. I like my co-host to come in with a general idea of where we're going to go, but we can go wherever it takes us. But the story of devolution is not meant to be metaphorical or like, oh, the devolution era. I more mean, based on parts 22 and 23, you believe that there is massive psychological operation components of the Patriot plan of devolution, continuity of government. And even if you want to get away from continuity of government, it's obvious to everybody who watches these shows, even to a lot of normies at this point, I would say, that Donald Trump is at the very least engaged in some form of psychological warfare against an enemy apparatus that's involved in the same thing against all of us. So I kind of want to revisit that and say, how did we win? Are we winning the story? Compared, whatever went on with elections and all that. So, but our first sort of section, I call it the story right now, and it is devolution related. I'm glad to have you on, not just for that discussion, but with everything going on right now, there's a lot of narratives.
It's crazy.
Most of the biggies over the last couple of weeks are about the international theater.
Yep.
And I've been saying on the Power Hour for 2+ years now, I really am of the belief that the actuals of the devolution operation were, if not more about the international, they were just as much about the international than about the domestic. So I want to start with, before we get into the Middle East stuff, which I want to talk about, I'm sure you guys talked about it last night, but the how Trump is dealing with these international figures right now. We've talked about Mexico and Canada a little bit, so you can talk about that. Right now, we haven't talked about yet, Macron and a lot of that stuff. And maybe to set it up, the brief clip that is obviously going viral and is very mimetic of the Don being back to his old handshaky ways.
Oh no, my son might be awake. Oh,
all right, if you have to bounce.
Dude, I might have to bounce for a little bit. Okay. I'll be right back once I get into bed. I'm so sorry, dude.
Look at this guy trying to be a dad. I mean, what a jerk. All right. Anyway, let me play that again for you guys. I can lead us here. We've got the Trump handshake with Emmanuel Macron. Man, this one is particularly bad to me for Macron. And just in case everybody thinks that Anons and people in this community are overstating the importance of these scenes, we've got Fox, social media reacts to Trump dominating world leaders with Macron handshake during meeting in France. And if you just Google around, Trump handshake or something with foreign leaders, you're going to see about half of the media establishment talking about social media posts with Trump dominating foreign leaders. You're going to see the other half defending the foreign leaders, basically either saying Trump is not dominating these guys and he's just shaking their hands in very weird ways, or you're going to see them saying that he is trying to dominate these foreign leaders, and that's part of the Donald Trump as a big meanie jerk face. I think I saw Ash in the chat just say, "What do you make of the nonverbals in this visit, start to finish?" Yeah, and that's a good way to put it, right? Like I'm not somebody who particularly enjoys going through body language from like deep analyzing it. I mean, I've seen the videos. There's body language expert and stuff, and I'm sure that there's some science to it. But when it comes to things like body language, I think a lot of that stuff is it just hits you on a, as Ash said, a nonverbal level. It just hits you on an immediate sort of instinctive level. You just know where the balance of power in a social situation resides. And at the very least, even if you don't want to go full bore into how much there is to planning of how Donald Trump is going to go shake all these world leaders' hands and how he's going to sit and how he's going to stand with them. We've all seen the infamous videos of the Queen. The fact that it's a narrative that Trump was pulling Macron off balance and that he's done this with a lot of world leaders. I believe he even supposedly did it with Vladimir Putin years ago. The fact that that is a narrative is just so juicy to me because of what it implies about Trump's return to the stage. But I don't want to move on before John gets back here. But before he gets back here, I'll take this opportunity, actually, to grab some of the boosts from last week. And we had Awake in Mass. I want to make sure I didn't already read these. Today is the 8th. We had Mother's Nature sent $20 over last week. Been watching Badlands since day one. I waited to see if you'd make it to episode 2 before supporting. Congrats and cheers from downtown Boston, the belly of the beast. See you in Plymouth. Yeah, well, now we're on episode 3. So if anybody was waiting to send a boost in to see if we got to episode 3, I don't know if there'll be an episode 4, but there is an episode 3 that's already collapsed into reality. We've actualized the narrative. WooBuy129 sent $25 over. Love the show. The narrative weaving kept me locked and loaded the whole time. BB and Ash worked so well together. It was great. Keep it coming. Yeah, I mean, at least Ash had the good sense of actually being on the show, unlike tonight's guest, who's being a dad. I mean, I feel like you could just let those kids run amok, and they'd be totally fine. And that is the boost. John sends one. Gotta lay with my son here until he falls asleep. Be back shortly. That's okay. We forgive him. In terms of reasons for not being on the show, I guess that's not a horrible one. Tom Terrific sent $25 over. A little something for the cause. Thank you very much, Tom. Melindy, if this intro does not stir something inside you, you have no soul. It's actually a good rabbit trail we could go on. I know we mentioned it in episode 1 because Absolute helped me put that together at my behest. But that is exactly how the intro to the show is meant to hit you, Melindy. I think there's some people that are kind of confused at first, where they're like, you're going to talk about narrative warfare and politics and geopolitics, and every single clip from the intro is fictional. You got Game of Thrones in there, you got 300 in there, some Dune, some Paul Atreides. But yeah, it's meant to make you feel something. And again, one of my key intentions with this show is getting the point across, more so than just, hey, we're in a period of narrative warfare, more so to get the point across of the inspirational power that stories can have, whether they're true or fictional. It's a double-edged sword. The power of those narratives has been used against us for a long time. That's how all these social movements grow. I mean, they don't really grow organically. It's just through complete dominance of the information battle space, the PSYOP battle space, mainstream media, social media, politics, movies, entertainment, sports, which we saw a ton of that during 2020, from BLM to Ukraine to Israel. I think I was joking in a private chat the other night. Mrs. Bright and I used to drive around locally, and I used to call it the triple threat. If you could find a house in a liberal area that had all 3 flags, the BLM flag, the Ukrainian flag, and the Israeli flag, that is the triple threat. If you find that, there was only a brief period of time when those 3 flags were all somewhat relevant at the same time. And if you found a triple threat, what you've actually found is somebody who is so enthralled in, as Chris would call it, the central narrative, that they've basically lost all touch with reality. Twofers are pretty common. You'll often see Ukrainian flags alongside Israel flags. That's especially interesting given the current narrative, which I can grab in a second. Seamaster sent $50 over. Love the narrative and Badlands. Very much appreciated. Yeah, I guess I'll circle back to this first topic, but the Syria thing is huge. I want to get John's thoughts on these things, but I'll just give you guys kind of a preview of where my head's at. If anybody did not see, if you're not following, most of my co-hosts don't follow any of my social media stuff because my posts are too long, which is not shocking, I suppose. But I'm sure everybody watching this show follows all of my posts. So you've seen Donald Trump has put out his posts about the Syria situation. According to the latest in the central narrative, let me refresh and see if there's anything new. The latest headline out of Zero Hedge: Damascus is now ruled by Al-Qaeda in suits as Assad emerges in Moscow. This is a completely fascinating narrative deployment to me. I mean, the whole thing. Not saying there aren't actuals there. Not saying that Al-Qaeda didn't take over Syria, not saying Assad is not now in Moscow. I mean, let's just take it for what it is, take the reported actuals at face value, and let's just pretend that that this is all happening exactly as it's being reported. I believe this post Trump made was on Saturday morning before the sort of end of the story. And he said, opposition fighters in Syria, in an unprecedented move, have totally taken over numerous cities in a highly coordinated offensive and are now on the outskirts of Damascus, obviously preparing to make a very big move toward taking out Assad. Russia, because they're so tied up in Ukraine and with the loss there of over 600,000 soldiers, seem incapable of stopping this literal march through Syria, a country they have protected for years. This is where former President Obama refused to honor his commitment of protecting the red line in the sand, and all hell broke out with Russia stepping in. But now they are, like possibly Assad himself, being forced out, and it may actually be the best thing that can happen to them. There was never much of a benefit in Syria for Russia other than to make Obama look really stupid. In any event, Syria is a mess, but is not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. Now, this is maybe a good rabbit trail opportunity where some in the media think that we're insane for overanalyzing Donald Trump's narrative deployments. This is the perfect example of a post that I think was made to be overanalyzed, and I think we can basically read it in order, and I'll just give you my thoughts on what Trump is saying here, because I think it's bicameral, and I think it's kind of beautiful. So first of all, he's saying, you know, he's giving you the basics of the central narrative. We got these Syrian rebels going to Damascus, taking out Assad. You've got it being seeded into the normie hive mind if people were not aware of what's been going on here since 2014, 2015. Trump educates his base in Normieville and says Russia is backing Assad, right? You've got separatist forces going into Syria. You've got Russia that has been backing Assad in Syria. Now, if anybody doesn't remember, some of the only controversial, quote-unquote, hot conflicts during Trump's first administration revolved around Syria. There was that time when he had threatened Russia and the U.S. were kind of threatening each other over airspace, people encroaching on each other's contested airspace, maybe a lack of communication between military deployments in the area. But my theory on that time period, which I think reality has borne out, is that the United States and Russia were effectively executing something of a pincer move against ISIS forces in Syria. I think we know this because ISIS was effectively wiped out during the first Trump administration, and we also know that before Trump was in there, Putin and Russia were trying to keep ISIS out of Syria and away from Assad during that time period. We also know that they took out Libya, they took out Gaddafi in Libya. This whole area is obviously this destabilization zone. The entirety of the Middle East has been a destabilization zone. And Russia and the US, from my personal framing, have had the same enemies. When I say the US in this context, I'm talking about the good US, the Trump US patriots. So he's telling you the surface level there. He's also, I think, seeding in, he's building up even more to that scare event, World War III, Russia's desperate sort of narrative by telling normies Russia could have prevented this march through Syria, but they weren't able to because they're stretched thin in Ukraine. Now, I don't believe that personally. I dispute that I guess I would say. But hey, it's effective for the purposes of the narrative that Trump is trying to get across. Russia is desperate. They weren't able to stop this. But that's that little line there, I think, is another interesting data point that tells you what Trump thinks about this situation. So keep in mind, Trump is putting this post out, obviously telling his base what's happening in Syria is not good, right? I mean, sometimes it really is this simple to just say, is what is going on right now, even if we don't know all the details, even if we have some of the actuals wrong, is what is happening right now good or bad? From the perspective of the MAGA movement, the United States, world peace, whatever. Take your positive actual. Is what's happening right now good? No, it's not good. But what's funny there is Trump is telling you this is not good. These people are making a big move toward taking out Assad. This was before we're told that they did, and they got Assad to flee. And then he says Russia, because they're tied up in Ukraine, seems incapable of stopping this march through Syria. So people take that as Trump basically negging Russia, making fun of them or something like that. But what he's actually doing is telling everybody that what's happening in Syria is not good and Russia were the ones trying to stop it. So in a roundabout way, he's telling people that Russia had been stopping this bad thing from happening, and they no longer are. Couple other juicy bits here that John will be good at commenting on. You've got the all caps, President Obama refused to honor his commitment of protecting the red line in the sand, and all hell broke out with Russia stepping in. Now, this is what I said about bicameral. This is why I think this is a bicameral statement. You can read that from the perspective of Russia bad. Trump is talking about how the Obama administration had no respect from Putin, no respect from Russia. Just like we got during the Biden administration, Russia goes into the Donbass, he goes into Ukraine, and Trump is in the peanut gallery saying, hey, this wouldn't happen on my watch. You can take that way. Obama wasn't able to protect the red lines. That's why Putin went into Syria. That is not how I read that statement. How I read the statement is that Putin went in to stop these ISIS forces in Syria because Obama would not stop them. He's not saying that Russia went in because the US was weak, because Russia is against US interests. I think he's saying Russia and Putin were taking care of the problem and protecting the, quote, red lines that the Obama administration and the US were not protecting. Now, you can take that any way you want to take it. Remember that some of Donald Trump's original deployments back before we knew that we were in an information war was that Obama had, quote, founded ISIS, right? Everybody remembers those tweets. I think those tweets were in 2012. They might have even been earlier. He's talking about Barack Obama founded ISIS. You know, he had a lot to do with them. And again, you could read those posts bicamerally. You could say that he's just commenting and saying that Obama allowed, you know, that the Obama administration was a weak administration and it allowed ISIS to gain a foothold. I think that this community, this audience understands that he's being a lot more literal there. But then my favorite piece here, which is why I highlighted it in this post. But now they are, like possibly Assad himself, being forced out, and it may actually be the best thing that can happen to them. There was never much of a benefit in Syria for Russia, other than to make Obama look really stupid. So what does that remind you of? To me, you can call this a stretch if you want. You are free to do that. I said this is a soft rerun of the 2021 Kabul withdrawal by US troops, and Trump gave us a hint of it Saturday morning. From an actual perspective, the world is realigning around the regions of responsibility, sovereign alliance lines, multipolarity, that's what people like Putin and Xi talk about. No more global police forces is what that means. That includes the US, of course, but it also includes other sovereign alliance players. So it's another way of saying people who've been following Badlands, and a lot of the creators here, Kyle used to talk about this quite a bit. We've obviously talked about it a lot. The 2021 Kabul withdrawal from Afghanistan was a narrative disaster for the Biden administration, and yet the net effects of the end result of the U.S. withdrawal from Kabul looked shockingly similar to the consummation of Donald Trump's Doha agreement, where he had agreed with the Taliban, he had signed an agreement with the Taliban to withdraw U.S. forces entirely from Afghanistan. I believe the original timeline was something like April 2021. Maybe I'm wrong on that. It could have been later, but obviously it didn't happen on that original timeline. We left all this equipment back there. The narrative was saying $80 billion of equipment. The actuals are supposedly, that's not exactly what happened. Some of that stuff was a little exaggerated. But either way, right? It was a huge narrative. The U.S. withdraws from Kabul. It's a total botched withdrawal. It reminds people of a lot of the Vietnam footage that was going around. Black Hawk helicopters fleeing Vietnam, and that was a disaster. I think that was under Johnson. And yet, if you're in this audience and you're engaging with the info war, you were able to kind of look at that and say, well, what's the end result here? U.S. troops are no longer in Afghanistan. That was the new forever war. You went from Vietnam as a forever war to the Middle East in the early 2000s under Bush, obviously stretched and got worse through Obama. Trump comes in, promises to end it, starts withdrawing us from hot zones. And yet, as we saw during the Biden administration, many of us understand that if Trump were to just cold withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan, there was going to be a period of chaos, like waves coming back in to fill that void. And many of us believe, I think that this is part of the devolution operation. I think this is the gravity of the devolution operation, that Donald Trump couldn't be in public power when this happened. Lee Walden says Nixon was president during that time. Thank you for the correction there. I'm not up on my Vietnam history. My forever war of my generation was the Middle East, so I'm obviously a lot more up on that stuff. But either way, the analog was the same, right? Disastrous withdrawal, and yet we're no longer in the Middle East. So if you compare that, that's the U.S. The U.S. has this disastrous withdrawal narratively, and yet, did we want to still be in Kabul? No. We all wanted to be out. So it looks like Joe Biden, our boy Blue, kept one of Donald Trump's original promises, which was to get us out of the forever war in the Middle East. You can think that he was doing that on purpose, or you can think he was totally hamstrung. Remember, Biden gave many public statements specifically telling the media that he couldn't withdraw from the Doha agreement, which I think John in particular has talked about that doesn't make any sense. If you actually look at presidential authority, commander-in-chief authority, there's no actual reason he shouldn't have been able to withdraw from those agreements. But we're told by our boy Blue that he couldn't withdraw from them. Positive actuals, besides the chaos that happened there, damaging narratives. Now, even when a lot of the counters that people like me will get for the positives of the Kabul withdrawal is that, hey, you can't call it all narrative because what about the Marines that were taken out at the gate? And, let's take that at face value. Well, it's interesting to me that you had Burns, I believe it was, the head of the CIA, take an emergency flight over to Kabul to speak supposedly with alliance forces, also known as the Afghan military. And if you've done any sort of deep dives into the Afghan military, then you're probably not a big fan of them. You probably didn't really consider them peacekeepers. A couple days after Burns is there, you have this attack on the gates. And what a lot of us said at the time that the media was not reporting is that the bombers at the gate in Kabul, they took out a bunch of Taliban guards as well as U.S. guards. So as Taliban soldiers that were also guarding the withdrawal from Kabul, from Bagram Air Base, as well as the US Marines. And for anybody who didn't know, the Taliban are enemies of ISIS. So part of the Kabul withdrawal ended up with Taliban forces ironically using the military equipment we left behind and hunting down a lot of the remnants of ISIS. Supposedly that's still been going on ever since then. And to bring it back to right now, I see some analogs. Hey,
I'm
man,
so sorry about that.
It's okay, man. Have you heard my rambling about this?
No, I couldn't find my headphones, and
Okay.
so I watched your ramblings. I'm sure you had no
All right,
problem
so-
filling the time.
Well, you can jump in right here. This is the first topic I wanted to get to anyway. I was just giving people some background on the Syria withdrawal. The story of it, to me, is uncannily similar to the Kabul withdrawal, but not from an American perspective. And the reason I say that is this thing I highlighted right here. I also want you to talk about the red lines from your perspective. But starting out, Trump says, now they are, possibly like Assad himself, being forced out. It may actually be the best thing that can happen to them. He's talking about Russia. There was never much of a benefit in Syria for Russia other than to make Obama look really stupid. And my sort of thesis here is the Kabul withdrawal that we talked about a lot in 2021 was narratively catastrophic for Biden in the US, right?
Yep.
But it also had the net effects of consummating a lot of the Doha Agreement, maybe not exactly how we thought, got us out of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this makes me think of the Sovereign Alliance stuff where Trump is saying, man, Russia just couldn't hold down the fort there. Like, he's given them some shots. But then he goes, yeah, but maybe this is for the best. Maybe they shouldn't have been there, after he had led his statements all weekend by saying Russia had been the only thing stopping the advance of al-Qaeda into Syria during the Obama administration. So I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the red lines thing. Anytime you see Trump say anything red line, it thinks of, I think of the NS or the NEFs, National Essential Functions. Like, those are the red lines that Devolution is protecting. But with Syria in particular, it's interesting because when we talked about this last night on the show, Thomas Wichter, when I first started following him, he was doing threads about Syria, and he'd always talk about, back in, I think it was 2017 or 2018, Russia was in Syria and Trump was in Syria, and Trump basically used the rods of God against a whole platoon of troops with 100% casualties. He always says half of them died, half of them were just injured, and then they left, and that was what basically changed Putin's mind about Trump, and that's when Putin was like, okay, well, Trump's willing to actually do something here. And so Syria's always interesting. I'm not a big follower of the overseas stuff, but anytime you see a foreign leader get basically overthrown or swapped out, you have to first wonder, okay, who the original leader that was there? Was he a good guy or a bad guy, right? And when I say that, I mean in terms of us. So was he a regime puppet, or was he actually a sovereign individual? And so I'm assuming, I guess I don't even know what to assume. If Obama was in there, you'd have to think this Assad guy was regime, right? Like, if Obama was working with Syria and sending troops over there and money and everything, he must have been a regime puppet.
Well, Obama was against Assad.
He was against. Okay, well then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
why that statement, again, I know I'm picking this statement apart. It's not just because I was filibustering because John left. It's actually because I think that I went full retard on this specific statement. So look at the way he frames to your point there, look at how he frames the beginning. Opposition, this is before Assad fled, from what we're told. This was Saturday morning. Opposition fighters in Syria, in an unprecedented move, have totally taken over numerous cities, blah, 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 obviously prepping to make a very big move toward taking out Assad. Russia, because they're so tied up in Ukraine, seems incapable of stopping this literal march through Syria, a country they have protected for years. This is where former President Obama refused to honor his commitment of protecting the red line in the sand, and all hell broke out with Russia stepping in. So he's saying right there, to me, Obama was not protecting Assad. He was not protecting the Syrian government. And in fact, I mean, this stuff is where you get into some of the white helmets, the UN peacekeepers, conspiracy theories. Many believe that the Obama regime was backing the separatist forces that were in there to take Assad out, just like Hillary Clinton famously celebrated over the death of Gaddafi in Libya. To your point, I don't know if Assad's a good guy. I don't know if he's a regime puppet. I don't know if he's a sovereign alliance guy. I don't know any of that. But I do know this maybe provides a little bit of color. I say that I don't end my analysis with playing the opposite game, but I do start it there. And this was an unedited screenshot I took from The Guardian. I do The Guardian because it's the globalist rag. And this is how The Guardian is framing the fallout here. Syrians celebrate the fall of Bashar al-Assad after 5 decades of dynastic rule. Ousted president reportedly in Moscow. Tears of joy and sadness as disappeared emerge from Assad's prisons. From doctor to brutal dictator, the rise and fall of Bashar al-Assad. So, to me...
Assad fled to Russia?
He fled to Russia. That's according to the narrative. He is in Moscow right now.
Well, I've also heard that his plane got shot down or something. Did you see that rumor?
I didn't see that narrative, no.
Yeah, there's a rumor out there that it got shot down. I don't know if it's true, but this is honestly a confusing one because if you think sovereign alliance, you think Trump and Putin are working together, right?
Yep.
And so was Assad the good guy? I don't know. Trump's post on this it's almost fascinating. But when it comes to any of this stuff, the best time for like these regime changes for Trump are to happen while he's technically not the president yet, even though he's acting like the president. Everybody's treating him like the president, but he's still technically not the one in there. And so now's the best time. Like, I feel like we almost saw one in South Korea too.
Yeah, that's true. And that one, I know Chris was all over that one. That one might be a little bit of seeding for whatever we might see elsewhere, including here. But to me, I sort of, from a devolution perspective, or again, the reason I bring up the Kabul withdrawal is because you just mentioned it with Trump. One of the big benefits of Trump being off the stage, besides a lot of the obvious, again, the point of tonight's show is narrative warfare, psychological warfare, aspects of devolution. If we think that there could be these sovereign alliance plans or whatever, however far you want to take that, mutual agreements, mutual understanding with some of these other superpowers such as Russia, it stands to reason to me that there would be some mirrored scenarios. And it's funny because with the Kabul withdrawal, the U.S. was basically humiliated from a military perspective, right? But to your point, Donald Trump doesn't take the fall for that because he's not there. The word or the term face saving was used a lot during the Israel stuff, Israel and Iran. Mm-hmm. I think that might be what's going on with Trump and Putin right now. We'll see what happens. But Trump is saying, he's kind of on the one hand saying like, oh, Russia can't keep their shit together and they've lost control of Syria. But he seems to be saying it's a bad thing, what's happening in Syria, which if you reverse engineer that, he's saying Russia were the only ones keeping control in Syria. And now they had to withdraw because of what's going on in Ukraine. So to me, it's sort of like Putin gets the excuse of saying, yeah, we're dealing with the Azov battalion and everything in Ukraine, so we can no longer protect the Syrian government. And actually, your point on Assad or your questions on Assad, it's kind of interesting to think about him as an analog to the Afghan government, right? Where it's like, were they totally evil? Were they good? Either way, they were something of a puppet regime. And right when Big Daddy US wasn't there, they collapsed immediately. So look at this. According to the story, right when Russia pulls its troops out, the regime government or the Assad government immediately collapses.
Yep. Yeah, so who knows what's going on here, but it does feel like this, these separatists or whatever, they're like the Taliban over there. This is interesting. Yeah. This weekend has been nuts for me with my kids, and I haven't been focused on any of the actuals that have been going on, but
they're impossible to figure out.
They really are. Yeah. Something you said earlier, though, like right before I had to go deal with my son, it was along lines of the international stuff that's going on is just as important, if not more important, than what's going on here in terms of Trump walking away and devolution and whatnot. And I think that's I was thinking about that more and more, and I think it's very true. And it's not necessarily that stuff is more important, but it's stuff that only could have happened with Trump out of the picture. And it's everything we just said here. Trump being in office, like there's a level of culpability that he has for everything going on all over the world. And so there's numerous things that had to take place. And like your series focused on a lot of this stuff with Russia and,
Right.
but in terms of sovereign alliance and taking out the true enemy, which, you know, is why Trump had to walk away, the narrative warfare, a lot of the actuals that needed to be done, a lot of the cleaning out of stuff that couldn't have happened with him in office, because you can't win a narrative warfare while I don't think anyway, while actually doing the actuals that need to be done. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, on the one hand, sometimes I say, oh, the Ukraine stuff during this time period was easier to figure out than stuff like Israel, Gaza, and then maybe now with Syria. But in fairness, maybe it's just because I've said before, I was really interested in the Ukrainian theater going back to 2014. Even when I was a liberal, I was paying a lot of attention to that. So maybe for me, when that narrative started, it was like, oh yeah, I mean, the Azov Battalion needs to be kicked out of here. So I was able to immediately defect from the mainstream narrative of saying Russia bad, because I'm going, the Azov Battalion are fucking Nazis, right? Granted, I don't have that same ability when it comes to Israel and what's going on there. But to your point, you know, it's actually one of the most difficult things to me about trying to analyze the Israel theater in particular, because I don't trust the Israeli government. I don't trust Bibi Netanyahu. You know, he was cheerleading the Bush administration on. He was a big part of the forever war in the Middle East, if you believe that stuff. So definitely don't trust them. And yet, if there are actuals going on there, especially if they're these big kinetic operations that we're being told of, I do have that back of my head feeling that whatever actuals are going on need to happen. It's just that, are they happening in the way we're being told, right? Like,
I know.
When we've got Israel doing these tactical strikes, they're very narratively damaging to Israel. Mostly, you know, some are supporting them, but most of the international world and most of the U.S. population is not supporting them. But is it possible that they are taking out cells that need to be taken out, and yet it's good that the narrative is bad? Like, it's good that people are turning on. And then, you know, speaking of Israel, bringing it back to the Syria thing, I almost like spit my drink out when I saw the headline that I'm sure Ghost is doing a write-up for the Substack tomorrow, where Netanyahu is basically cheering for the regime change in Syria right now. So again, you look for you look for negative indicators, and you're like, man, Trump is kind of doing the, we don't want to be involved, this is all bad anyway, like, I'm going to go home. And you've got Russia saying that this is bad and Israel saying that this is good. So it's sort of, it's a total knot.
It's all so confusing. And you know, Trump wants to be the president that's like the peacemaker. He doesn't want any conflicts. He doesn't want to get us into any new wars. And depending on how the Biden regime handles this, like, that could put us into another war situation where we have troops at war, where Trump has to deal with that. And I think they're looking for as many opportunities to do that as possible. The Israel situation is such a mind F as well, because, and I stay away, I leave that to Ghost, because no matter what you say, you're an anti-Semitic. And I don't even have the time or patience to deal with it. But I wonder how many of these narratives, this is a full control thing, right? This debate, we have it all the time. Mm-hmm. Are patriots really in full control? And a lot of people think they are, whether it's just of the actuals or full control of the narrative. I personally don't feel it's that way, but I wonder how many narratives are put out there that they're not in full control of, but they still take advantage of. Like the situation going on in Syria right now. I don't believe it's a full control situation. Like, I don't think the white hats or the ghost in the machine or the Q-op or whatever were behind this story of Assad being overthrown, but they're sure as hell going to take advantage of the situation if they see benefit to it. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah, that's kind of what I see going on. I see somebody in the chat here that's retarded, Just the Facts Media. I'll just respond. Usually I don't respond, but saying, like, apparently we don't know that Trump was taking out ISIS. That's literally the entire point of what I've been saying here, even before John was here. Part of the reason that I think we're looking at a Kabul analog is, I've even talked about this, of personal anecdotes of people I know that were involved in operations over there in the military. And again, not like clandestine operations, but just people who were deployed in 2018 during the Trump administration, specifically targeting ISIS. I believe that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were affecting on an actual level, that they were affecting, here we go, right here, that they were affecting a pincer move on ISIS. And Trump has essentially confirmed that. If you have something to add on that point, go for it.
No, this is just part of my series. This is part 18. Yeah. This is the only article I really did an in-depth anything on Russia or Putin. But I know your series is much bigger than that. But the point was that these are two people that we're told are enemies, but they worked together to face a common enemy in the past, and that was ISIS.
Yeah.
And I mean, who's this? The point of this article was who's to say they wouldn't do it again against a common enemy in the deep state? But yes, they have worked together in Syria, taking out ISIS in the past.
Yeah, and so if you look at that and you go back to what we're talking about with Assad, I don't know all of the history of Assad. I'm just saying on the public narrative, what you have here is what you just showed on the screen. Trump and Putin, at the very least, everyone acknowledges they effected a pincer move against ISIS, a mutual enemy. Even the U.S. military acknowledges that. They weren't flying technically joint missions, but they were targeting the same ISIS cells. And during 2018 in particular, when Trump essentially came in and Obama had been saying that there's no way to stop these people. This is going to be a 100-year-long war. All we can do is try to slow them down and cut them off and all this. And Trump and Putin together blitz ISIS over a period of 2 years. And then part of me could go, okay, well, why wasn't Putin able? Putin was trying to do that beforehand. Why weren't the Russians able to do that? And I think it was less about military power with Vladimir Putin. I think it was a lot more about the terminology of red lines. We talk about them from the perspective of patriots a lot, but the deep state has red lines too, right? So imagine that you're the Obama regime and we consider them deep state, and you're Vladimir Putin. If you take out an ISIS cell that is in US airspace, you're setting up a perfect scenario where I think the US regime, they were waiting for Russia to do something that they could provoke a kinetic confrontation. So imagine you have Russian Su-47 or whatever come into U.S. airspace, supposedly, and take out an ISIS stronghold. You scramble U.S. jets and you hope for something to go wrong there. And that's what we know that Hillary wanted. So I don't think it was that the U.S. and Russia, when Trump came in, were flying like, hey, these are joint missions. It was more they were keeping each other out of each other's ways and saying, you hit this, we'll hit this. You look at that now and you fast forward to today, we don't know what the truth is here, but we do know that Trump and Putin were taking out ISIS together. Assad was Putin's guy. Assad is gone and he's in Moscow. And now Al-Qaeda, according to the narrative, backed by Israel, is going into Syria. It's like, it's cartoonish at this point. Yeah.
It makes no sense at all.
You've got that's why I did a double take with the Netanyahu. And again, they're not saying that they're directly backing them, but they're at least supporting them. Where I'm like, hold on. So if you're a normie, imagine you're a neocon or something right now, and you're trying to reconcile that Israel is backing an Islamic extremist regime change operation in Syria. I don't know.
Yeah. This did you look into, by the way, the Assad plane shot down thing?
I didn't see anything on it. Did you find something?
I mean, and again, I don't know if this is BS or not, but what I saw earlier on Twitter, there's a few things. Like Assad's plane was shot down while attempting to flee Syria. And there's multiple. Very likely that Syrian President Bashar Assad died in plane crash near Homs last night. The plane, which took off from Damascus International Airport, is believed to have been shot down. And then I saw a couple things where, and again, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I saw a couple things where it was Israel who was behind behind shooting it down. And that's the only reason I brought it up again, is because you said Israel backing this overthrow here. It's just crazy. We don't know
according to the official central narrative, he is in Moscow. So it looks like that stuff was fake news. They're saying that he's been given that this is like Fox, AP, CNN, Washington Post. They're all reporting that.
Okay, yeah, Reuters, Al Jazeera. Yeah, they're in Moscow. It looks like.
But again, look at that narrative where you've got, Assad was fighting against these separatist forces, which One of the other tells to me, I was reading in The Guardian earlier today, some other of the mainstream sources about the fallout of this situation. That's where I always start. Like, okay, we can't untangle the history of Syria in the Middle East. Of course, we're not going to figure that out tonight. But look at what the mainstream media is saying about it. They were using analogs to the Arab Spring and saying that this is reminding them of the Arab Spring. Now, I remember being a liberal during the Arab Spring where we were gaslit into the idea that that was good, that this was the people rising up in Egypt and Libya and, taking down the masters and, rising up. That then you get the famous "we came, we saw, he died" with Gaddafi. Come to find out that just like the color revolution with the Maidan coup in Ukraine and many, many others, the Arab Spring looks like it was fomented and helped along by Mossad, by the CIA, by Western forces to get regime change over there. And when you say that, people start freaking out because they're like, oh, have you actually looked into Gaddafi and Assad? You don't have to think that these guys are great guys. All you have to come to the conclusion of is that these guys are not regime guys. They're clearly outsiders to the regime because the regime sent peacekeepers in to kill them in the streets and then drag their bodies through the streets, right? So it's like, doesn't mean that they're sovereign alliance, but Assad looks like he was one of these guys and he's still being backed by Moscow.
Well, okay, I think about something even more interesting here that kind of, it clicks a few things for me anyway, when you're looking at the situation over in Syria. The sudden overthrow at the hands of a revolt partly backed by Turkey and with its roots in jihadist Sunni Islam limits Iran's ability to spread weapons to its allies and could cost Russia its Mediterranean naval base. The big one here is this hurts Iran. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. And I've always been curious about, okay, if Trump and Putin are working together, why are they allied with Iran, who I see as a big enemy? That's like who Obama gave money to. Mm-hmm. They've been the center for a lot of BS. Again, I'm not the expert here. Ghost is. But when I see this, if it truly does actually limit or affect negatively Iran, the timing of this is even more interesting because it's going to be coming right before Trump takes office again, where we could see another peacemaker move of something going on in the Middle East. And it's something that happens before he gets there. His hands are clean. And this could make him again look like more of a peacemaker when he gets in there and does whatever he's going to do. So this is more interesting to me now than it was even 5 minutes ago.
And that point about Iran is, again, brings me back to the just broad analogs that I see, or the mirrors I see to the Kabul withdrawal, where think of the damage, actual and narrative, that the Taliban, the word Taliban in the Western mind was completely toxic. I mean, whether you're liberal, conservative, anything in between, Taliban equals bad, basically, right? Now, I'm not saying that isn't true. They were enemies of the U.S. The U.S. military was fighting against them. Yeah. U.S. military was fighting against the Taliban. But as most of us understand now, Donald Trump isn't going to go to the table and sign an agreement with the Taliban if he thinks that there's no redeeming qualities at all. If he thinks that this isn't a regime or a group that he can work with or that has any chance of stabilizing the region. And now it's actually kind of funny because if you guys do some Google searches and look for mainstream media articles about what the Taliban has been doing, they keep petitioning to join, world organizations. I believe they've officially petitioned to join BRICS. That hasn't been approved, obviously, but the fact that they're doing this kind of thing, the other kind of negative indicator about the Kabul withdrawal is that we were told by mainstream media forces that it was going to collapse, that, women were going to be paraded through the streets, they were going to reinstitute Sharia law and all this stuff. And hey, am I saying I'd want to live in Kabul? No, I would not. But the media doesn't talk about Kabul under Taliban control at this point, and it might be because things are going kind of okay. They were going after, they did continue to go after ISIS after the 2021 withdrawal. So I just look at it with Russia and Syria right now and say, is this a chaotic situation that otherwise needs to occur? And to your point about Iran, is the ending of whatever's going on with Syria going to end up actually putting us into a position where we needed to be there? Like, I don't know if Al Qaeda can be rehabilitated narratively to the level that the Taliban were. Like, I'd have a harder time with that.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if we're seeing something similar play out here, where it's the, hey, you guys got to figure it out. That's kind of Trump's statements, is like, you got to figure it out there. And I don't think he's talking about the U.S. like alone when he's saying stay out of it. I think he's talking about, he's saying in his statements, Russia should have never been there. And I think he's saying the same. I think he's drawing an analog to us being in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, to saying Russia shouldn't be in Syria. So whoever's in Syria right now has to figure that shit out for themselves.
I agree with that. I look at Iran and I see like one of the biggest actual enemies that exists. Like, the deep state is there, but the deep state, in my opinion, funds them, and they fund terrorist groups, and they commit all sorts of acts of terrorism. They're behind all the actual, not all, but a lot of the actual bad that we see in the world. And so them being diminished in any way, this does seem like some sort of white hat back thing. Like, how did this happen now and it hasn't happened for 60 years? Yep. 60 years, but it just happens like almost overnight when Trump is weeks away from being the president again. Like, the timing of that is just too much of a coincidence for me.
Now, I would also add another mirror to Kabul. I know I'm beating that dead horse, but we're talking about the narratives mostly. But let's say there are actuals going on. Let's just take this at face value and say that this is true. Look what we have today. U.S. bombs 75 ISIS targets across Syria after Assad overthrown. Wow. U.S. Central Command announced Sunday that U.S. forces have conducted multiple dozens of major airstrikes targeting ISIS camps and their terror camps across central Syria. CENTCOM stated on X, the strikes against ISIS leaders, operatives, and camps were conducted as part of the ongoing mission to disrupt, degrade, and defeat ISIS in order to prevent the terror group from conducting external operations and to ensure that ISIS does not seek to take advantage of the current situation to reconstitute in central Syria. That's an interesting word, isn't it? Reconstitute.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll toss it to you, but that was fascinating to me because all the OSINT nerds and everybody who's like, I'm going to tell you on Twitter what's actually going on in Syria, even though nobody fucking knows what's going on. Their narratives, they were saying that what was shocking to the OSINT and military communities about the last 48 hours was that the rebel forces that were moving through Syria were effectively meeting no resistance.
Crazy.
And that Assad was gone, right? And it's like, okay, that's strange. Let's put that in the back of our heads. And then the next day, we're told that U.S. Central Command authorizes 75 major bombings. So,
who was
like,
ISIS sided with over there? Was it Assad?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't think so, because supposedly these are the type of people that were trying to depose him. So what I'm wondering here, this goes back to your Iran point. I often think that the word Iran is like a catch-all that they're using for the bad guys, right? Like CIA, Mossad, the deep state. So, of course, ISIS. And we think it's a coincidence that the Assad, nationalist forces of Syria just pull back. The Russians all pull back. That's probably an even bigger comm. The Russians all leave and withdraw. We're told by Trump it's because Putin stretched too thin. And then the US takes the opportunity to blitz ISIS. So I think we might have just seen the United States use Russian maneuver defense with the Russians in Syria. Like, the Russians pull back and then the Americans bomb the incoming ISIS forces.
I got to show you something I just found. So I just did a quick search. The role of the Islamic State in the Assad's regime strategy for regime survival, how and why the Assad regime supported the Islamic State. And then the first time they're brought up, it may seem contrary to conventional wisdom, but the regime of Bashar al-Assad has consistently supported the Islamic State terrorist group, even as the regime struggles to retake control of Syrian territory from the various rebel groups engaged in the Syria civil war, including ISIS. ISIS has been fighting in Syria since its precursor organization sent operatives into the country from Iraq in 2011, but the Syrian regime of Assad took the strategic decision to enable and facilitate the continued survival of the Islamic State in Syria in an effort to paint all of the Syrian opposition as terrorists. So this sounds like we backed the overthrow.
It does.
If this is true.
It does. Maybe that's what's going on.
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out when this article was written because it doesn't say, but I mean, this is interesting.
Really strange, though. Like, that rabbit hole goes pretty deep when you then consider, okay, so the Russians were helping with joint airstrikes on ISIS, and yet the Russians were then supporting Assad, who was supporting ISIS.
I don't know. My
Right?
mind is
That's tough.
right now.
I don't know what the truth is there, but that on the surface you would appear to have a contradiction here. Where is this? Who is writing this?
Matthew Levitt. He's director of the Reinhardt Program on Counterterrorism and Intelligence, Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
So this is technically not U.S. military putting this out, right?
No, but it tracks with what we just saw.
Right. The Assad thing is what's... I wonder what Grok would say about this.
Yeah.
I've been playing with Grok lately. I've really never messed around with it. Does Assad support ISIS? Could see what the robot...
In order to survive the Syrian civil war, the Assad regime created a central crisis management cell, reporting directly to President Assad himself. According to this Mohammed guy with a long name, a former CCMC employee who defected from the regime and smuggled out many CMC documents. The CCMC was an organ of Syria's ruling Ba'ath Party. Yeah, this whole thing is about Assad helping ISIS.
See, and we have to be careful with the way we use the term U.S. because I see people doing it in the chat. When we're saying the U.S. backed this overthrow, normally I would say, okay, the U.S. regime. But if there were airstrikes conducted, the fact that we've got Devo Man on here implies that this is a Patriot-backed operation of some kind because you've got kinetic U.S. military involvement, and we've not seen that in any of these other theaters we're talking about when it comes
not to the scale
Ukraine. Right.
And think about like the coordination and the pre-planning you would need to conduct 75 of these airstrikes.
Exactly, and this is supposed to be an
this ahead
organic
of time.
event.
Yeah,
Yep.
just like all of a sudden, okay, well, we see these people doing it. We better, make sure that ISIS doesn't, bloom overnight. So let's take out all these people. We know exactly where they are right now.
Man, and again, now think of that. You're absolutely right that you would need foreknowledge to conduct those operations as the U.S., but Russia knew about it too because none of their forces are in the region. And Trump is saying, man, looks like Russia's too... So this is a pincer. This is definitely...
100%.
Now, where does Assad fit into it? I mean, if he's in Moscow on friendly terms and it looks like he wasn't an ISIS guy, or maybe they've got him in custody. I mean, who knows?
Maybe it's just a war story. Like Russia's playing innocent too by taking him in.
Just for shits and giggles, I thought it was interesting to ask Grok. And again, guys, I'm not taking what Grok says as gospel, but this stuff's interesting because it's a large language model. It's actually getting exponentially better. I was actually reading a whole thing on Grok 3. I don't know when it's coming, but that the step change in large language learning from Grok 2 to Grok 3 is going to be, I forget the term for it, but the biggest step change in AI that we've seen. Yeah, like someday it was besides exponential. They said something specifically related to this, but anyway, they say it's complex. Let's say Assad supported ISIS. There are claims Assad's regime released Islamist prisoners at the start of the Syrian crisis to fuel the civil war, strengthen jihadist factions. Reports suggest the Syrian government had business dealings with ISIS. Some analyses indicate that Assad regime might have avoided directly confronting ISIS more aggressively in certain regions. I mean, these are kind of soft, the arguments for. Now let's look at the arguments against. Analysts have argued that ISIS fought the Assad regime on multiple fronts, suggesting they were not allies but adversaries. The notion of a direct formal alliance has been contested due to a lack of conclusive evidence. Official statements from the Syrian government have been used to argue against the idea of support. The Assad regime has often portrayed itself as a victim of terrorism from ISIS. There's contention around the interpretation of Assad's strategic decisions, suggesting any perceived support might have been more about pragmatism and survival rather than genuine ideological or military support. So it's pretty interesting, too, when you consider who owns Grok and deploys Grok, right? Like, that's always in the back of my mind with what Grok says. So the summary here I find interesting. While some evidence and analyses suggest Assad's regime might have indirectly benefited from ISIS presence, others argue this is more complex, with Assad's primary focus being on maintaining power against various opposition groups. I mean, essentially, there's no evidence to suggest that he was backing ISIS, and just look at it. He leaves the country, and then the U.S. bombs ISIS. That doesn't seem like Assad. Those were Assad's boys.
And it makes me wonder, okay, let's just play with the idea that this was a Patriot-backed thing. They wanted Assad out of there because it's going to help all of the Middle East relations, which it sounds like it will. Where else are we going to see things like this happen in the next, 3-4 weeks, where overnight we're going to see like this random, seemingly, out of nowhere regime change or a civil war or overthrow of the government or something crazy? And how is Trump going to react to that, respond to that? He's going to fingers off, I bet, but I bet this isn't the last one.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, I think this is what I used to say international Devo, like even a couple of years ago on the Power Hour. And it was never meant to refer to the devolution operation directly controlling international events.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
But man, when you see there is some level of coordination here, I think, that relates to devolution. When you see, to your point, you need foreknowledge of this event in order to conduct these strategic strikes, and the fact that there are no Russians in the area, where they were littered in the area, that's coordination at the very least.
With Devolution International or whatever, it's not that there's been devolution going on internationally, or like you said, that there's any form of control. I don't think, but I'd have to imagine if Trump was going to do something like this, he'd obviously let some of his, allies, whether they're public allies or maybe the more important ones were the ones that were adversaries, like the Sovereign Alliance people, like Russia. They know what's going on. Trump would have told them that he was walking away, and it's because he told them that he wanted these things, stuff like this, to happen. There's no doubt in my mind that they knew. They had to have.
Absolutely. And one more point on the Syria topic is, again, I think this is Trump's most recent statement on it, which, to your point, you just mentioned in the narratives that Trump is advancing. Assad is gone. He fled his country. His protector, look what he does here, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. There's no reason for Russia to be there in the first place. Then he goes into the Ukraine stuff. Russia and Iran are in a weakened state right now. Zelensky and Ukraine would like to make a deal. There should be an immediate ceasefire. Negotiations should begin. Too many lives so needlessly wasted. Too many families destroyed. If it keeps going, it can turn into something much bigger and far worse. I know Vladimir well. This is his time to act. China can help. The world is waiting. Now, if you're one of us, you can take that in quite a few ways, where we're talking about scare events, we're talking about peacemakers, and in the Righteous Russia series, obviously not the only one, we've been talking about this for a long time, I had said, however the next few years plays out with Ukraine and Russia and US, it's going to end with the peacemakers, which many of us have said. But one of the points I really tried to drive home in that series is that in order for there to be this seismic event of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin making peace together, the buildup to the threat of war has to be immense and believable. And I don't think we're anywhere near that right now, right? Like Trump giving Putin little digs about Syria withdrawal. It's like Putin gave those same digs to the US about the Kabul withdrawal and Ukraine and the rest of it. So I think when he says this is Putin's time to act and Xi can help too, I think he's saying, like, all right, time to escalate the narrative, and then set me up for when I come in.
I like how you said that. So, speaking of narratives, right? The way that the media has created this narrative for Trump is that he's like a Putin puppet. They're stablemates, they're best friends, like all these things. And that's going back to the Rich Higgins memo, which I've written about in those articles you referenced earlier, part 23. Trump, in a lot of ways, has been operating in the media's battle space. They're the ones that presented him with this battle space that he has had to operate in. And only so often can he bypass that. The Q drops, I think he's done so. But most of the time of what we see, he's operating within that battle space. And so if he's going to be the peacemaker, you only make peace with your enemies. And so,
or your almost enemies, right?
I mean, yeah, well, he's going to want the narrative leading up to them making peace to be as like their enemies as much as possible. And so even in there, he's taking the strong line against Putin and in a lot of ways calling him ineffective. I don't know, or however he phrased that. You know, they ran to Russia and because they did a poor job protecting him. He's going to push that narrative probably even further at some point than the media has been pushing it to where they're enemies, so that it makes the peace, the contrast of peace, look that much better. So yeah, we're probably going to see a narrative buildup of the scare event too.
Yep, I absolutely believe so. I mean, it's funny because going back to the narrative of the 2024 election, which whatever the actuals are, we all agree that the narrative, the mandate, etc., was overwhelmingly positive. Trumpism has this big win. The America First movement has this big mass psychological win. But a pattern, I can't reference this with mathematical certainty, but I think that there's a general pattern that most of us have recognized over the last few years, that whenever we get like a big win, there's a rug that comes at some point. Now, we've been talking about the rug being something to do with inauguration, something to do with elections. It could be that. But I really think, to your point about the scare event and everything, I think that those big wins are to kind of build everybody up so that they can get over that next tension point. And yeah, it's if anything, Trump winning the election has made me more certain that we're getting a build up to a scare event, because the narrative, even according to normies, is that the regime is trying to get us involved in some sort of war, World War III, before Trump gets in. Like they've almost put like a rapid fire timer on it, a warp speed timer on it.
Yeah. Well, like if you're Putin, what benefit do you have of actually making peace here? Like you're bleeding NATO dry. You're bleeding the US dry by prolonging this war because we just keep sending money. Like what actual benefit is there to him to end this conflict?
Well, if you take him at his word, he would like the war to end right now if the battle lines stay drawn where he's redrawn them, right? Like Russia wants the Donbass. They want the Donbass part of the Russian Federation. They want no more counterclaims on the Crimea. And if you pay attention to Zelensky's narrative deployments over the last few days, he's gone all the way to the point of saying he's willing to concede the current battle lines as long as he gets into NATO. So he's just backpedaling all the way. First, it was no negotiations at all. Then it was like limited negotiations. Now it's, okay, fine. Russia can keep everything it's taken that they wanted, but we still want NATO. So again, he's going all the way to that. But I think what Putin would need for peace is complete assurances that there's going to be no counteroffensive. There's not going to be NATO forces trying to go into the Donbass. And Trump is probably the only leader that they're going to trust in terms of making that promise.
Okay, but if Trump's only going to be here 4 years, like how do you ensure that kind of assurances when beyond Trump?
Well, this actually goes into, I wanted your take on it. I know you had to leave earlier. The first topic I was going to get into, we can do a brief version of it. I think this ties into Trump's world tour and with Macron, etc. We'd actually talked about this last week, I think on Wednesday, and a little bit on the Sicario episode of Story Hour. I do think that there's a lot to Trump's narrative deployments with Canada and Mexico, etc. And now with France. The way I see it, it will be up to the peoples of these nations to not lend their mandate to any sort of kinetic conflicts. I think the American people have shown that they are firmly opposed to any involvement or even funding over in Ukraine against Russia, and you'd think that that would hold in a decade from now. But I'm wondering if part of what you're seeing with this Trump, like a renewed Trump world tour, the friend he visits I think I saw Ash posting about this the other day, which is a great observation. You're telling me Trump has a trip planned over to France days before their government collapses, and they've currently basically got a no government. They've got no actual government going on right now. They don't have
France?
the legal mandate. Yeah,
When did this happen? See, like
this happened on like last.
Oh yeah.
Was it Monday?
But Macron's still in charge.
Well, he's in charge of an inept government. Parliament currently is basically a hung parliament. You know, this isn't an American system, but they've literally lost the mandate. I'm not even talking about public mandate. They've literally lost the mandate to enforce French law right now, according to the parliament. So now the big question is, what do they do? Do they call Macron is supposed to be in there until 2027, and yet his parliament is totally inept. So he's still the president, but it'd basically be like a president with a Congress that can't do anything, just to like literally has no authority to do anything. It hamstrings them in certain ways. So Trump goes over there at the same time.
Could that be a Congress that has such a slim majority that all it takes is one person breaking ranks from the Republicans, and you can never get a majority vote? Because that's where we're at right now with Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it'd have the same end effects. I don't know exactly what the how the legal situation works, but I know that they're effectively completely rudderless. Like they it's not even a matter of we're in some sort of gridlock and it's like 50-50, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
It's like because the majority party lost this last vote, nobody has anything. Nobody can enforce any laws. Nobody can make any new laws.
that's amazing.
They can't. Yeah. So, and again, you look at the timing of it. Trump goes over there. So the reason I bring that up in relation to what you're asking about Russia, I mean, how could Russia take assurances that the West is not going to encroach? I really think we're seeing part of a international exposure now, where the peoples of France, the peoples of Germany, Canada, Mexico, I think they're getting an accelerated and more dramatic version of what we went through with the Biden administration, but I think theirs is going to be crazier. Like, you need German people and French people and British people standing up and saying, we want nothing to do with funding these wars. And we already have it with the AFD in Germany and stuff, right? But like, these people need the public mandate. They need public mandate leaders. So, to your point, I don't think you can just have Trump sign a peace deal and it's like, oh, that's enough. I think we need the West and all of these participating nations need to sign these deals. And I don't think it's because the deal is what stops it. It's that the deal is this massive symbol of public mandate that we're not going to encroach into Russian territory.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a clusterfuck, honestly, over there right now. I don't know how Trump's going to figure it out. I do believe he's got a solution to this, because I believe there's been something going on a lot longer than any of us realize. But did you see that Trump, in his interview, I think it was yesterday, he brought up Canada and Mexico becoming a state again?
Did he?
Yeah.
With the sit down? I haven't seen the sit down interview.
I just
think
saw
that
that
was
one
today, right?
I don't remember when it was, but I just saw that one clip.
Yep.
I can show you here, and I don't know if this is taking you off your trajectory here.
The whole point.
Okay, let me show you this.
You're subsidizing Canada to the tune of over $100 billion a year. We're subsidizing Mexico for almost $300 billion. We shouldn't be subsidizing. Why are we subsidizing these countries? If we're going to subsidize them, let them become a state. We're subsidizing Mexico, and we're subsidizing Canada, and we're subsidizing many countries all over the world. And all I want to do is I want to have a level, fast, but fair playing field. You're subsidizing.
Like, to me, it sounds like he wants to cut subsidizing everywhere. And that would include like NATO and everywhere.
Yep. Well, one easy answer too to your question about how do you ensure that nobody messes with Russia? Well,
Trump just takes over the world.
Well, kind of. I mean, but I think one of the main things I've really grappled with over the last few years, or at least I think come to terms with, is the fact that we really have been subsidizing these countries to the way more than we even knew, and not just financially, but to the point where I think it was last year where one of the only British battleships couldn't make it out of their port because it's so inoperable. I basically think that European armies are paper tigers in the modern age, and Russia knows this. So even you can even get away from sovereign alliance and say that once Trump wasn't in office, the reason I think it's Devo related, which I've said on the Power Hour a million times, is I don't think there's any way Putin goes into the Donbass if he thinks there's any chance of U.S. response, kinetic U.S. response, right? He had to know that U.S. troops were not going to step foot in the Donbass. But he couldn't have known that German and French and Belgian and Spanish and British troops weren't going to step foot there. So why did he know that? I think that's less about devolution, because I don't think we have direct control over the French military. I think it's more about, and I've talked to, some family members in the military, this is what they claim, that the European militaries are so weak compared to the big three of the US, Russia, and China, that it would be catastrophically easy for any of those big three to wipe Europe off the map. Like, not even really. That there would be no meaningful resistance of Russia going all the way through Europe if they actually wanted to. I'm sure French people would disagree with that, but we have almost as many, if not more, bases in Europe than European armies do, right? So yeah. If you look at it that way and you're like, okay, why is Trump actually the key peacemaker with Vladimir Putin? I think a lot of it is that that's the only military that deals with the only two militaries that need to understand that they're not going to fight each other, because there really aren't any other massive militaries that could do anything.
It makes you wonder about the Ukraine situation. And the Saturday DPH crew, I call them the fake and gay crew. Just for whatever reason, that's like gay. How things kind of split. Yeah, they are very gay, but it's also a lot of fake talk going on. About everything's fake, everything's fake. And the more I've done shows with them, the more they've kind of got me to think their line of thinking of how much is actually fake, and it's been good and healthy for me, and discussions with you too, because I've always been a very actual factual guy. But those two articles that I wrote, 22 and 23, they definitely shifted, or at least started the shift in my perception of how much of this is narrative war. And when you think of that, in terms of everything being a narrative warfare, about the narrative, about psyops, it makes you wonder how much of what's going on in Ukraine is actually real at all. Yeah. And you think of even the weapons we're sending, the money we're sending, how much of that is actually real at all? How much,
it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be, but also, what if the weapons they're getting and fighting the Azov battalion with, what if when Biden botched the withdrawal in Afghanistan and left all those weapons, those all got sold on the black market to, what if those are the weapons that are getting, we don't know.
Yeah.
But when you brought up the paper tiger militaries in Europe, that's just a narrative then. This whole war in NATO in general is just a narrative playing out. And I mean, it takes a lot to, I know it takes a lot to shift your focus, even me mentally, that's a hurdle for me to overcome, thinking it's all just a narrative. And so that's why it's good to be on the show with you, because maybe you can help get me over that hurdle a little bit, because I know the narrative stuff is real. I know this establishment of the narrative warfare aspects is real, but I still find myself thinking in that, actual. But when you start to think about everything being a narrative, it's almost a mind fuck. It's like a trip. It's like an LSD trip.
It is. And that's why I try to be honest about my mindset of saying that if, in my heart of hearts, I genuinely do lean toward Chris and Patrick, and I genuinely do feel that most of what we are looking at when it comes to these conflicts is narrative. But I try to operate as if I could be wrong about that.
Yeah.
Because the consequences of being wrong about that are pretty impactful. If you convince yourself that everything is fake all the time, then your governments could basically do anything and commit any atrocities, and you would, like, let's say the Trump administration, if we were just totally wrong about everything and they start just bombing the Gaza Strip,
Yeah.
right? And really doing it. And we're sitting here going, this is all fake. Then I understand that counterpoint of saying, like, well, now you're passively allowing catastrophic situations to occur. But the reason I do think a lot of this stuff is fake is, and I don't get upset with people calling it fake, is I think the consequences of believing these things are real are often worse, because it paralyzes you into this fear state. Believing, one of the things I said a couple of years ago that I hold to is that I think that all actual wars, real wars, are the result of lost information wars. And this should transition us into the meat tonight, which is really the reason I wanted to have you on, of especially Devolution Part 22 and 23, where you talk about irregular warfare. For anybody who hasn't read those in a while, go back and read them. The first one is about irregular warfare, Part 22. Second one is about truth as a force of nature, but narrative warfare, I would say, focuses a little more heavily on narrative warfare. I think we can bridge the gap. And that's why I wanted you as the guy who's all about actuals and documentary research. And yet, in the meat of your series, there is acknowledgement, whether your theory is true or not about devolution, these documents are real. These psychological operations are real. The infrastructure is there. The NSC was talking about these things at the time, and we know throughout American history, we know that the military takes psyops and narrative warfare very seriously. And I would say it's because they understand that. They understand that if you win the story, then you can actually do whatever you want on the back of that story, right? So if a bad story wins, then that's catastrophic, because then you get a war in the Middle East based on false pretenses. But if a good story wins, it's good that it was fake, because I think you can avoid war. So, but I didn't know exactly which angle to go in with the part 22 and 23 because they're so big. But I guess starting with part 22, irregular warfare, I'm interested in how your thoughts have evolved. Take us back to the time in which you wrote that one, and how did it inform how you were looking at devolution from a irregular warfare perspective, not just continuity of government, but specifically irregular warfare.
Okay, so yeah, that's a great question. Leading up to that series, or those two articles, I'm trying to think of the ones I wrote. So it was the vaccine one, was part 15. Then I did the one on China, and that was more of like I had so many people asking me if Trump was working with Putin and Xi, and so I kind of wanted to disprove it by saying, look at all this body of evidence that says they weren't working together. And then I went in, I had an addendum, which was pretty impactful. I think that was one of my favorite addendums, right? At the Ukraine one, because that's right when the Ukraine stuff kicked off, right. February or March of 2022. I had Putin, and then we had the RICO one, because the RICO case just dropped, which was interesting. And then the Trump justice one, and I think that had a lot to do with the Durham. And then it was the 2000 Mules, because that was the movie that came out. And so I wasn't trending towards this or in any way. I was just, as stuff was kind of happening, I was writing about it, how it kind of fit with devolution, and because there's a lot of connections everywhere. And then that Ghost in the Machine video dropped, and that's what kind of blew my. Man,
should I play the original one?
Yeah, you certainly should. Yes.
I mean, we've seen it a lot, but this is how John set up that part 22 at the time, and this was the first one they dropped, right?
Yeah, this is the first video they dropped. It kind of came out of nowhere, and I don't even remember how I saw it. It was kind of getting shared around in our groups, but what really blew my mind is actually seeing who put the video out, and then I dug into them in that group and started seeing ties from that group, the fourth PSYOP group, to.
I'll just run it on mute, because you don't really need to. I mean, everybody has seen this.
It's Ghost in the Machine. It's on YouTube. It's by the fourth PSYOP group.
Yeah,
but this was the video all about PSYOPs, all about warfare. They can conduct warfare anywhere, be on any machine. The whole thing. They start with the Sun Tzu quote.
Yeah,
the whole thing is fascinating, and that's what started my research. And the once I realized all the moves Trump made and how connected psyops and irregular warfare were to the people Trump surrounded him with at the end of his term, especially like Chris Miller, a
Yeah.
miso specialist. It blew my mind.
Explain what that is, because I had completely forgotten that term until I reread these articles over the last couple of days.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, I think it was the Obama administration who changed it used to be psychological warfare, like going back to World War I or II or whichever one they were most prevalent in. And then Barack Obama changed the wording, the phrasing from psychological warfare or operations to military information support operations. But then when Trump was in office, they changed the definition back to psychological warfare. But in all of like Chris Miller's bios, and a lot of people's bios still, it's military information support operations instead of directly saying psyops. But yeah, there's so many moves and so many people connected to the last 3 months of the setting up the Devo term. Everything is connected to psyops and irregular warfare, including Trump's biggest executive order, in my opinion, 13961, that strategy document that was released with it. That it talks about conflict below the threshold of armed warfare. Like that's psyops.
Yep.
Like he's talking about psyops as he's walking out the door. And so this like opened my mindset to, okay, why was he making all these moves? He's clearly setting up something to take place while he's gone. And then you can tie it to the Q operation. Of the whole point of the Q operation was to conduct a psyop, basically to win people back over. And that's what just like it all shifted for me in a lot of ways. And
this, yeah, to your point there, and again, the reason I wanted to go in this direction to have you on the show is actually the little sequence in this, and I know people like the music, but we've seen this a million times. This little segment of the video that they post, this is what I really want to drill down, and what I think those two articles do a good job of laying out. I've often said, to go backwards, I've often said that what really got me onto your articles was being a Q person and following that stuff. And then the Devolution series to me demonstrated, put together a framework of actuals that explained what we were looking at with the Q drops. Not that it was all about the Q drops, but that the Q drops were giving us to me, the Q drops were giving us the story of the Great Awakening, right? Like they were, I was talking to Abs about this a couple of weeks ago. The Q drops, I know that they had facts in them. I know that they did. But really, if you read those, even though they're written in this like information warfare, they've got red lines and all this coding and dot connecting, which I think is real and I think is worth doing. What were the Q drops? To me, it was a story. It was a story of them saying, listen, there is a deep state. It is more pervasive and subversive and powerful than you ever knew. But there are patriots in the shadows that are fighting against them. And we, for the first time maybe ever, we have a chance to win. And the other story I think that the drops were getting across was, we need you. We, meaning military patriots, we need you, citizens, to be involved in these operations. And then to bring it back to psychological warfare, regular warfare, the reason I love part 22 and 23 is, to me, people like us had been talking about narrative warfare and the importance of it. I think your series, this segment of the video shows that the PSYOP group, the U.S. military, they understand the why of why storytelling and narrative warfare is not just this cute thing that I'm interested in. This is why. The little exchange here. Narratives are a weapon because they can do the following. They can deceive, they can persuade, and here's the key. They can change. So we talk about power projection all the time.
I love that part. If you just rewind it like 10 seconds too, where it says change, go to change. Okay. Yep. Right. And if you pause at the right time, that sign says devolution instead of revolution.
Oh yeah. When his fist is up there.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yep.
sorry.
Yeah. No, I want to toss it back to you, but that change is the key word there. We talk about power projection. If you want to Ash and I discussed this last week. if you want to get to the most literal possible definition of power, what is power trying to do? Change something, right? Whether it's narrative power, electric power, physical power, emotional power, what is power projection trying to do? Change something else into something else. It's trying to, you're trying to make somebody conscious, unconscious. You're trying to make somebody alive, dead. You're trying to make one social movement inert, another one powerful. So, and I think what your articles here did with these names like Miller and Ezra Cohen Watnick and Rich Higgins, especially for me personally, it put a framework together of no, this isn't just some random shit on YouTube. There was a framework that seemed to be put in place around Trump specifically for these kinds of deployments.
Yeah. So what you said there about the Q stuff, and again, I have still yet to this day not read all the Q drops. I get sent a lot. I'm in communication with people who talk about Q all the time. I see drops almost daily, but I've never gone through and read them all. But my part 23 focuses a lot on, and maybe not, I shouldn't say focus, but part of the conclusion is like it's logical to say that the Q operation is legit and it was a white hat thing because look at the impact it's had. And it would make sense that Trump would need to do that to bypass the mainstream media. And what you said there about the Q op, like, hey, we're showing something's real, we're showing there's a deep state, and we need you guys to get involved. How many times did Trump say throughout his presidency that the media is the enemy of the people? The media, like he specifically pointed to the media, calling them the enemy of the people. And what you said there about the Q op, trying to get people engaged, which it certainly did. We were getting engaged finally in the psychological warfare, this irregular warfare. And the media's been in control of it for forever. They were it was one-sided, the entire thing. The Q operation, you can't argue against this, or I've never seen a logical argument against this. The Q operation was like the most impactful thing for the awakening. I wonder what if Trump would have been able to do anything in his first term, if Q had not woken up or, started or whatever, woken up so many people. But when it comes to, devolution, and I think the way I think about this now, like how we know we're winning, something you asked earlier, is how many people now are actually talking about psyops and narrative warfare and irregular warfare that never were doing so. Even 2021, nobody was using those words.
No.
The fact that they're talking about it now and acknowledging it and can point out psyops, that's how you know it's working, because people are recognizing that they exist. That's like step one.
I think, that's a good point. And sometimes I wonder, I used to pay attention to politics and things when I was a liberal. I've talked about that I became disillusioned during the Obama era. I had gone down rabbit holes of 9/11, etc. But the Q drops was what re-energized me. And I think the why, that to your point, I think that proves it was effective, because if you were only able to engage Americans who were already pounding the pavement and digging into every little nuance of corruption, etc., then you're not actually accomplishing anything with some kind of new deployment, right? But they got people like me it wasn't just that I was liberal, it was I was disillusioned. Like I wanted nothing to do with politics. I was just like, fuck everything. I'm just going to live my life. And it got me engaged and energized. And that, at the time, I'm like, okay, I don't know why. Maybe this is more about me maybe it's more about my mental state than it is about the drops. But I really think that there was something to the way the planning that went into those drops, the military planning that had to go into those drops, were clearly extremely effective at casting a super wide net and getting people who had completely left the info war back into it. Or, to your point, people who didn't even know, we didn't use that terminology. I didn't use that terminology at the time. And now we're all talking to each other in terms like narrative warfare and information warfare and psyops. And it was like not just an education sort of thing, but it was
Like a spark.
It was the opposite of a demoralization campaign. It was like a moralization campaign at the same time. I don't know what the word would be, like a morale campaign as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. shit, I think I hear my kid. My kid, by the way, is still not falling asleep. He's up there. I finally just put a movie on for him and was like, just fall asleep to this movie.
Just put psyops on loop.
Yeah. So we'll see. I'm sure he'll come down again. This is the one negative about you starting your show at 8 instead of 9:30 my time. But anyway.
Well, I don't know if you had gotten into it. There's on part 22 in particular, you're talking about miso. I'll just share this so people can see what I was.
Yeah, at some point I want to get into I do want to show the timeline of what actually Trump did before leaving office.
Yeah, specifically with irregular warfare, right?
Yeah, because at the end of this article, I think I summarize it. It should be toward, this is at the beginning.
Yeah.
But if you go to the end, I have a summary.
First of all, I absolutely love this particular section with Ezra Cohen Watnick is more relevant than ever to me because of the wording here. President Kennedy gave these remarks at the opening of the nuclear age.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. And it's at Fort Bragg. Stuff. And it's funny it's interesting they changed the name of Fort Bragg with Trump out of office. I wonder if that'll get changed back. But keep going down. Right there.
Okay.
No,
narratives are at the center.
Oh, go back up. Go back up a little bit more. Above this highlighted section. Keep going right here. This section here, the bullet points. These are all the actuals that Trump did specifically related to narrative warfare before leaving office. And this is what led me to the conclusion that, okay, well, Trump was obviously setting up some sort of narrative warfare campaign before leaving office, because why else would he do this? 2020 NDAA from December 2019, but it basically opened up the authorities, cut all the red tape to conduct clandestine information operations, which is the same thing that they did with NSPM 13, except that was with cyberspace and cybercom.
Oh, yeah.
This is with information warfare. So that's notable. And then the October 2nd, 2020 Irregular Warfare Annex. So when this was published on October 2nd of 2020, Ezra Cohen Watnick at the time was the head of the ASDSOLIC. I don't remember where I saw it, but the person who actually wrote a majority of the annex leading up to this was Christopher Miller before he went over to the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center. And so Christopher Miller and Ezra Cohen Watnick were both the last two people to touch this annex before it got published as an annex to the National Defense Strategy. So that's very notable because both those people came back in Trump's term before he left office. November 3rd, the election, obviously, November 7th, he's declared the winner. 9th, Chris Miller, the irregular warfare guru who his hands all over that annex, gets named. Ezra Cohen Watnick was named 2 days later, same with Akash Patel. November 18th is when they gave that speech above, talking about spec ops and whatnot. 13961 is December 7th. And in that strategy, like I said before, Trump talks about warfare below the threshold of armed conflict. And that's so important. I highlight that earlier in the article here.
Right.
And then the 2021 NDAA, which would have been, signed in December of 2020, they increased the funding for regular warfare. And so that has Trump's hands all over it too. But why would they do that unless they're going to be increasing the amount of irregular warfare that they conduct? And then
was it in this article or the other one? There was a section. I don't think it was your writing. It was something you were citing that said, by definition, PSYOPs, psychological operations, are difficult to research. Was that in one of these?
Oh, probably.
Can you remember that? Because I can't search them because you use freaking screenshots.
Oh, sorry, bro. You can it might be the highlights right below that. Right below that. Yeah, they might be in here.
The objective is to win the narrative before winning the war. Principle. So what is this from? This is from the annex.
Yeah, they're talking about the annex. This is a guy who wrote an article about the annex.
Okay.
And I just thought it was really interesting how he wrote about it.
Well, and this is why I wanted to get into these, because especially with the benefit of hindsight, we were talking about narrative warfare at this time, but look at the benefit of hindsight of the Biden era and look at what they're talking about here, that the objectives of narrative warfare from either side In irregular warfare, legitimacy, credibility, and political advantage is the prize. Military efforts are only relevant insofar as they serve these goals.
Well, go down
So-
and read. Go down and read where it says second, and the narratives are the center. You're
Yeah.
gonna love this paragraph.
Second, narratives are at the center of irregular warfare. They help achieve buy-in for political projects and shroud the nature of actions taken. Lawrence Friedman noted the growing strategic salience of narratives in 2006, describing them as designed or nurtured with the intention of structuring the responses of others to developing events. Given the growing importance of narrative since then, scholars like Joseph Nye and John Arkilla now claim that in modern conflict, victory may sometimes depend not on whose army wins, but on whose story wins. But man, that is it. That's it.
And the
And
show.
again, the key here is that what John put together is Trump putting people in place who are arguing these things,
Yeah.
you know, in it from a military lens. And it goes both ways. One of the ways I frame it often is there's active and reactive, I guess you could say, like offensive and defensive deployments in warfare, right? Well, I think that goes for narrative warfare as well. There's active narrative, which I would say is the MAGA movement, Trumpism, America First. Like these are active deployments. But then there's all the defensive deployments, which is eroding the adversary's power, influence, and will. I like this writing. It's notable here that the minimum requirement in irregular warfare is not to build legitimacy, but to erode it. So, and maybe you can talk about this. A lot of what you're describing in the irregular warfare article in particular is stuff that the enemy, the insurgency, was doing to us successfully for a long time. And it just seemed like we weren't doing it back, right?
Well, yeah, and that's where I get into it in part 23 with the Higgins memo, especially, and I talk about the battle space that is presented to Trump. It's a 24/7 pervasive, all-out blitz on Trump from the media, and then that's where it gets me to the logical conclusion that if Trump is going to fight back against that, he couldn't just do it by himself by going on on a podium and saying, "Yeah, you guys are lying, you guys are lying, you guys are lying," because he was trying that and it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, after all these people at the NSC are getting taken out, all these deep state people, Ezra Cohen Watnick, Rich Higgins, and Derek Harvey and Steve Bannon, they get fired from the NSC after trying to take out the deep state within the NSC. And then like a month later, we have the Q drop starting, and they just so happen to be the thing that bypasses the mainstream media and getting these narratives. Like that's the Q operation and the timing after these people all left the NSC. That's not a coincidence either, especially when you look at how impactful it was in subverting the mainstream media narrative. Like you can't argue against it. But yeah, if I can find the part on the Higgins memo because it's in a weird spot. Especially since you can't search, like you said.
We can get into the Higgins though. Higgins is one of the more fascinating things you write about in part 23. So I want you to talk about him. But yeah, I remember there was wording somewhere here from one of the government sources that admitted, or maybe it was an institute, but admitted, it made me think of all the discussions we had. I think we even had this discussion recently on Power Hour. The discussions, on Kash Patel. We were talking about Kash Patel and saying some people call it copium, etc. When we're like, obviously he has to maintain narrative distance from these operations that we think have been going on, and people will call that cope. And yet any of the official military manuals or modules you read about irregular warfare will tell you that it's inherently difficult to research or talk about because of the nature of the operations. Not just it won't be effective if you're telling everybody what you're doing, but you keep using the word battle space. And that's one of the biggest things to take out of these two articles, that the battle space that Trump was operating in, that this actually goes to, something that you admit you're uncomfortable with, and sometimes I'm uncomfortable with. But I was curious of you revisiting these articles that you wrote and, trying to snap back into that mindset, but also the current mindset when it comes to Patriot psyops, because it's obvious that we are living through Patriot psyops. I mean, your mileage may vary on how far does that go, but I mean, I wonder what you think of it then, Patriot psyops, and how ubiquitous they were compared to what you think of it now.
Yeah, that's another great question because I do believe there's a morality thing here, and we've had this discussion so many times. The way I like to look at it is that they're truth psyops. Like there's psyops you can do with lying and completely presenting a false situation and a false narrative about and all these things, and that's just a lie. But I think you can also have truth psyops where you maybe it's not even a scenario that you presented, but you can fight with a truthful narrative about it, and those are different things. And I think people are especially Trump. I think he skirts that line more than anybody, but he has more information than anybody, and he's like an expert at tap dancing these things. But he's operating in a different battle space than we are. Mm-hmm. I think our responsibility is like Badlands Media, or at least me personally, and I know there's others in Badlands Media that feel this way, but it's operating in that truth battle space as much as possible because we don't know any of the actuals going on behind the scenes with all this stuff. But no, I know both sides are lying. They have to be. Mm-hmm. You can't come out and run psyops successfully, I don't think, with 100% truth at all times. I don't know if it's possible. Maybe it is, but I think you have to get people at least to a position where the truth psyops will be effective. And I don't know if you can actually just keep winning people over with truth, because that's what Trump was trying to do. He was telling people the truth a lot of the times when he was going out there on mainstream media, and it wasn't effective. Maybe it was a messenger thing. I don't know. But the media was very effective in keeping people asleep and thinking all these bad things about Trump. And I don't know. I mean, you have to break him out of there in a lot of ways. And I think I've talked about this before too. I think a lot of people, you get under the spell where, and it's a trauma-based spell. Like if you think what the effect of 9/11 had, it was a huge trauma event, and all of a sudden everybody's like for this foreign war. And a lot of people haven't broken out of that trauma, but it takes some sort of trauma to snap people out of it. For me, that trauma was Trump losing an obviously stolen election in 2020. That to me, that was a trauma event because it made no sense. Like I had become such a fanboy of Trump at the time because of all the Spygate stuff that I was like, there's no way he's got this. He was like a superhero to me. There's no way that he would allow them to do this to us, and he would just walk away from it. And it was because of that trauma that I dug in. There has to be more here, and that's what changed it for me. And so I think everybody needs some sort of trauma to get you out of that. I don't know what you even call it, like psychosis. Is it the mass formation psychosis that?
Yeah, I think that's the end result of it. It reminds me, actually, it's timely because today I had edited. Abs had written a new entry in the Devolution for Dummies series, which is free, by the way. It's on the Badlands Substack. But he used a couple analogs to the Inception movie, and he was talking about the kicks in that movie where you get to wake somebody up out of a dream layer, they need a kick in the dream world, right? Where they fall. So it's exactly what you're talking about. And the way I've often framed this in my writing is I've been calling what Patriots are doing on a whole macro, like including devolution, including the QOps. What is the plan, quote unquote? And I've described it as the good reset, reversal of the great reset, but using a reverse Hegelian dialectic, which when you talk about mass formation psychosis and a lot of the stuff that's in these articles, like the mechanisms through which psychological warfare is implemented, it's problem, reaction, solution, right? So you talk about 9/11, here's the problem. Now we engineer a reaction by telling you a false story, a false narrative, but the story makes sense, right? That's the key. The story has to make sense. The American people see planes hit buildings. They see an actual, which are the most effective problems, create an actual, guide the reaction via story, and then lead that reaction toward a pre-engineered solution. So to your point, the American people think that they're participating, like, who the fuck was it, right? Who was it? And then we're like, well, we're trying to figure out who it was. The government, we're on it. And look, there's some grainy pictures of some stuff in the desert. And we know Saddam Hussein's a bad guy because remember, we've been telling you that he's a bad guy for a while now. Mm-hmm. And now there's these pictures. So 1 + 1 = 2, right? That's how easy it is. But I think patriots are doing a reversal of that. So to your point, when you use the truth, that's how I reconcile it. Like, are patriots lying? Well, I don't know if they're lying so much as they're exposing enemy narratives, enemy lies, and refuting those. And then it's kind of up to us to go toward our own solution rather than them bringing us along it all the way.
Yeah. I mean, the 2020 election is a great example of what you just said there, too, because 2020, Trump didn't steal the election for Biden just to like be able to walk away and do all this stuff. Like, I think there was an actual there where these people did not want Trump to be president and they stole it from him. That was a battle space that he had to operate in. And so he had a decision to make on whether or not he wanted to walk away or not. And he chose to. But in doing so, like, that's where he set a lot of this stuff up. And this is where when we talk devolution, and especially a lot lately, you know, we get questions about, you know, how much in control are they? I think it really comes down to those NEFs, right? We talk about this a lot. But the other aspect to this, and it's hard to know exactly how much control there is there, but it is with the regular warfare and the narrative side of this thing, because there has to be something going on behind the scenes where the irregular warfare aspect of this battle is taking place. I don't think it's just us. I don't think it's just Elon owning Twitter and allowing us to be posting there. Like, there's got to be some sort of algorithmic, and I don't know the details of this because I haven't gone to PsyOps school, but I know they can go online and like they can change your perception of an event based on how many times you are fed a post on the internet, or even fed an ad on your computer. Like, they can get you to want and go buy Coca-Cola because you see the ad 20 times on your Facebook feed or whatever. I don't know how much of that is taking place either, but it has to be. I know it is. And I don't think Trump would be where he's at even now had it not been taking place. Like, there was a huge mass awakening that took place while Trump was gone. A lot of it can be credited to the Biden administration, but I don't think that's solely the fact. If they didn't have some level of control, they could have been successful in covering up and hiding the atrocities that was the Biden administration. You know what I mean? They tried. The media tried to cover for him left and right, but they weren't successful at it. And if there wasn't something else going on, I think they would have been successful at it, as they have been for decades prior. You know what I mean?
I would combine to what you're saying about the NEFs, but specifically getting away from kinetic stuff and just looking at narrative warfare. I still think it's interesting to think about NEFs, or if it's not NEFs, then maybe it's just thinking about what were the goals? What were the end goals? This is really the first question that popped into my head for having you on tonight. What were the end goals of the narrative aspects of the Patriot Plan? That's pretty broad, but because devolution, there were actual goals. There's the NEFs that have to be defended, but ostensibly, to me, especially rereading these articles, the narrative, it's patriots acknowledging to me that the narrative was more important because, you've said for a long time, patriots had the actual power projection capabilities to do things a lot differently than they've done them. And maybe they have done some things behind the scenes. This is where you've got like Guantanamo Bay theories and people in prison. Who knows? But we don't know how much they've done at an actual level. But the fact that they felt we needed a devolution operation in the first place, to me, I look at it and say, the point of the devolution operation is psychological, even though it's an actual operation. It's like it's an actual operation meant to put us on this awakening timeline that includes the Q drops and everything else. And I wonder how you look back on it, having seen the whole Biden term play out and then leading into Trump winning in 2024, like where the collective mind is right now versus 2021, 2022, and how much of Devo do you think was built around psychological operations?
I mean, I think a ton of it, if not most of it. I was looking at a conclusion here.
Feel free to bring anything up you want.
Yeah, I will. And I think I found that part where this is from the 4th PSYOP group website. This little gray part. Join the PSYOP regiment, or text whatever. PSYOP is a difficult branch to research, so don't hesitate to reach out for help.
Yep.
Which is pretty funny.
I mean, that's even pretty tongue in cheek, right? Like,
yeah. Okay, so like this isn't exactly what I was looking for, but it'll still work. By walking away from the stolen election, Donald Trump appeared more than weak. He appeared to be defeated. Really, it was just the start of the irregular warfare campaign to take back the country. This war over the narrative and control of America has been raging for some time. Trump and his team have been preparing their counteroffensive for years. It was put into motion when the election was stolen. The video asks us, have you ever wondered who's pulling the strings? Consider that a rhetorical question. The video itself gave us the answer. And so, yeah, I mean, I think a majority of, like, you think of the reasons Trump actually walked away. I mean, if you want to come down to like brass tacks of it, it was, I think it was to kind of avoid a civil war. I think he wasn't in a position at that time, without getting like full blown military in the streets everywhere, to prevent some sort of small scale civil war. They had paid actors everywhere, so that was part of it. Not that he couldn't have done it and probably could have survived it, but I think after seeing these last 4 years and how things have taken place and how things have transpired, I don't think Trump got only 77 million votes this last election. I think he got so much more than that. Yeah. And that's just in a fake election. Like, I think his support level and the number of people asking questions now and are actually like kind of in tune with politics and the state of the world generally is maybe even 2x what it was in 2020. Like 2020, it was COVID. People were just like pissed off at everything. They just want to get back to their normal life. But a lot of those people now they're paying attention. They're bought in. COVID gave them that buy-in. And I don't know, man, like it was super successful. And let me play a clip here. I put it in your video thing over on the side. Yeah. This is Chris Miller. Go ahead and play it. This is his definition.
Regular warfare, and this is loaded because of the Vietnam War with hearts and minds, but really what we're talking about is the center of gravity is the local population and winning their loyalty to the government that you are supporting or the effort that you're supporting. So that's kind of how I always end up keeping it simple.
I remember we watched that came out, I think, when we were at Patrick's wedding.
Yep.
That's probably my favorite Miller quote.
Yeah, he's talking about the hearts and minds. Like, the point of a regular warfare is to win the hearts and minds of people over to the government or effort that you're supporting. And here comes my son. He was doing that panel with Ezra Cohen-Wannick. Mm-hmm. So like those are two key figures, but that's what it's all been about, is winning the hearts and minds of people. And ironically, the best way for that to happen was with Trump not in office. Yeah, it's crazy. But I do gotta. I'm gonna go check on him real quick because I hear him running around upstairs. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I would.
Oh, sorry.
John boots me out of the street. I like the way John framed that in terms of looking back at what was the devolution operation successful. Well, to answer that question to your own satisfaction, you have to reverse engineer what do you think the end goal of the operation was. I'm going to replay that quick clip from Miller and keep this in mind. What was the goal of the devolution operation? Part of it, on an actual level, was to protect national essential functions of the United States. As John says, avoid a civil war, avoid a catastrophic kinetic scenario. I know that this clip is low. I can't artificially boost the volume, so you guys might have to just boost your volume when I play it. But think of what Miller says here in terms of what is the end goal of the devolution operation.
Regular warfare, and this is loaded because of the Vietnam War with hearts and minds, but really what we're talking about is the center of gravity is the local population and winning their loyalty to the government that you are supporting or the effort that you're supporting. So that's kind of how I always end up keeping it simple.
The center of gravity is the local population. And as John said before that, hearts and minds, he talks about Vietnam. As we always say with these figures, especially as I say with the things that they say, Christopher C. Miller is not just a military guy. He's not some JSOC guy. Christopher Miller is an expert in irregular warfare, which I highly recommend you guys reread Devolution Series Part 22 and Part 23 in particular. Read them through all of the context you now have of the effect of the Biden administration on the hearts and minds of the American people. Reread those from that perspective. And anytime a name like Rich Higgins, Ezra Cohen-Wannick, Christopher C. Miller, Steve Bannon, Harvey comes up there, Derek Harvey, I think. Anytime those names come up, think about their expertise in irregular warfare. So John had his answer. The way I would answer this: was the devolution operation successful? Well, what was the goal? The goal was to win over hearts and minds, but really that's about public mandate, right? Donald Trump, in the lead up to the 2024 election, literally rebranded the election as one about America first and MAGA, make America great again, to this is a mandate election. He said, quote, I need a mandate in the vote. And as we've talked about a million times on these shows, I don't think he was talking about I need more votes this time. He was talking about I need the public buy-in, I need hearts and minds, I need the center of gravity to be on the side of not just Trump, but of the America First movement, of the MAGA movement. And ironically, it was the Biden administration that won those hearts and minds over to Trump, which brings me back to, I lost my place in it, but in part 22, some of the definitions of irregular warfare are admitting that irregular warfare is usually less active and more reactive. It's usually less about imposing your story onto the population, and it is more about destabilizing the opposition story, right? So think about the Biden administration. Was the Biden administration about, from a patriot perspective, was that administration about enacting or codifying a story to the American population? Or was it about exposing a story to the American population? I would say it was about the latter. In the aftermath of the Biden administration, it became socially acceptable, social permission, and all the rest of it to discuss what a clown show the establishment was. And I think all of that was done via the devolution op. So that's how I would frame it. I would say that it was entirely successful. Get John back here.
Sorry.
What? That's okay.
He's just never going to bed, but whatever.
I gave him my explanation for it, and same thing, but basically said what was the end goal of the devolution operation? It's, as Miller says there, to win hearts and minds. Were they successful in it? Little anecdote of me locally. I live in a blue area, and this is all retroactively. It's codifying to me the need for the 2024 fake election win even more. And I actually, surprisingly, we saw G Money say this at GART, and he's the last guy I would have expected to say this. But I'm seeing all these bumper stickers for Trump and MAGA after the election in my blue area that I was not seeing in the lead up to the election. So the fake election and Trump winning a fake election is still, to me, a worthwhile or effective psyop, effective part of devolution, because it's given people the social permission to be like, oh yeah, we are the majority. So that's actually an example to me, to go back to what you said about truth psyops, like the way you'd framed it.
Mm-hmm.
I really think you can look at the 2024 election as a truth psyop. Do I think it was a real election? No, I don't believe the numbers there. But did the right guy win? Like, was the story the end result of what the truth is? Yes. And that psyop has given people the social permission, accepting that we need election reform and all of that. But if you're just looking for the point of the devolution operation was to get public buy-in to this whole movement, then I think it was overwhelmingly successful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he had it technically the first time around, but yeah, it's definitely so much more now. And I agree with you. Like when we were leading up to the election, I was constantly saying, I think they're going to steal it, and I think that needs to happen because we need to expose our election. I mean, you guys have heard this a million times.
Yeah.
But I totally understand the narrative win that everybody needed. The part that sucks about it is a lot of people, including the wolves in sheep clothing on our side, are perfectly comfortable with just sliding right back into all elections are fine now. And that's what we can't have. Like, we cannot have that. So as long as we can get to 2028 and not be in that position where we're just all like trusting our election system again, then yeah, this has been a huge sigh of relief and an uplifting moment for everybody in the movement, and beyond. But yeah, I mean, what is the purpose of the devolution operation? It's really hard to answer that. I think winning the narrative stuff is part of it. I think, you know, you look at what is happening internationally, like we said, a lot of those things I don't think Trump could have done with him being in office. You needed to discredit the media too. Trump's been calling the media the enemy of the people. Maybe that has been the most important part. Like they are so irrelevant now compared to 2020. It's almost mind blowing. Like how much has happened in 4 years to discredit and delegitimize the mainstream media. I don't know. You could guess a million different things of what the actual purpose was. The winning the hearts and minds is probably the best way to sum it up. But there's so many like little aspects of that have taken place. It's been awesome, man, and it's been successful. Clearly,
I just lost my space, but I wanted to, on that point, I wanted to bring up one of my favorite sections here. What do we got?
Which article?
Here we go. I got it. In part 23, you know, again, on the subject of was the devolution operation successful from the perspective of narrative warfare. This is the section that I believe this is from the Higgins memo, right?
Yep. That's Higgins.
So Rich Higgins, you want to give people, if anybody somehow doesn't remember, like what's your Higgins for Dummies and his importance to this operation before I get into the memo?
Yeah, so I came across this guy in my part 23. I was going through, and it was right after the regular warfare stuff, and I knew Ezra Cohen Watnick was a big part of the devolution stuff from the beginning. Maybe part of that, if I'm being completely honest, was a little bit of confirmation bias from people talking about Ezra Cohen Watnick from the Q drops.
And yeah, right.
Yeah, and so which is another reason why I've stayed away from the drops, is because I know there would be more confirmation bias, and I don't think that's healthy. But once I did the part 22, I really dug into Ezra, and I started researching some of this stuff. Like, I remember the first time I came across the article. Am I on my screen? Let me go to my screen.
Yeah,
it was here. It started with Flynn and them taking him out, because that was a good use of them using psyops and narratives to get rid of somebody. I mean, they basically admitted to it in an article right here. Former Obama officials, loyalists waged secret campaign to oust Flynn. Like, they admitted to using narratives to plant a series of damaging stories about Flynn in the national media, eroding his credibility, discrediting him, and undermining the Trump White House. A series of leaks designed to undermine him. All this stuff. Like, so it started with Flynn, looked at who he brought into the NSC, which was Ezra Cohen Watnick, and shifted my focus to Ezra. And that's when I came across this article about the hit list that were being created by Ezra and a couple other cronies at the Trump White House in the NSC. And one of those people that he was working with was Rich Higgins. And so this is my first time really being exposed to him. And I'm pretty sure at this time, I don't think he had passed at this time yet, but he was pretty sick, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so this Rich Higgins guy he was meeting daily with Ezra Cohen Watnick, Steve Bannon, this Derek Harvey guy, and Derek Harvey's connected to Kash Patel and all others. I mean, it's all connected to the Russiagate, Spygate stuff. It's all crazy. All this was going down at the same time. But my first time hearing about Rich Higgins, started digging into him. And that's where, again, it's more irregular warfare stuff and information warfare stuff. So that was the first thing that stuck out. And I was like, okay, well, this is notable. Then I saw that he got fired from the NSC because of a memo he wrote that I think he gave it to Steve Bannon, if I'm not mistaken. And Steve Bannon was going to go give it to Trump. So he was pretty confident that Trump had seen this thing. And then I read the memo and everything it said. And it was like one of the most on the nose things I think I've ever read about. I think I've said multiple times since then that this should be something that you read every single month. And I probably do, if not more than that. But it's so on the nose. And one of the most important paragraphs of this right here, the battle space. And I've used this to explain.
That's what I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah, the battle space. These attack narratives are pervasive, full spectrum, and institutionalized at all levels. They operate in social media, television, the 24-hour news cycle, and all media, and are entrenched at the upper levels of the bureaucracies and within the foreign policy establishment. They inform the entertainment industry from late night monologues to situation comedies to television series memes to movie themes. The effort required to direct this capacity at President Trump is little more than a programming decision to do so. The cultural Marxist narrative is fully deployed, pervasive, full spectrum, and ongoing. Regarding the president, attacks have become a relentless 24/7 effort. And so, like, this is okay, narrative warfare, right? They're doing this, and going into later on in this article, I talk about, well, how do you fight back against this 24-hour pervasive thing? At the end of his memo here, even, it says this conclusion. There's two parts. The end state is attacks on President Trump are not just about destroying him, but also destroying the vision of America that led to his election. Those individuals and groups seeking the destruction of President Trump actually seek to suffocate the vision of America that made him president. Hence, the end state is not just a delegitimized, destabilized, immobilized, and possibly destroyed presidency, but also a demoralized movement composed of a large enough bloc to elect a president that subsequently becomes self-aware of its own disenfranchisement, which is what happened in 2020.
That is a all-timer of a line out of this Higgins memo, and you mentioned 2020, and I think that's a great
He predicted
encapsulation. Yeah, this is, to me, it's even broader than talking about something like the 2020. The self-aware of its own disenfranchisement. When he's talking about an end state in terms of the enemy, if the enemy had won, basically, I mean, they were basically there before Trump came in. Earlier in the show, I said I was disillusioned. Well, what is that? When I was disillusioned and blackpilled, that is more of a sign of victory for the enemy than a normie who never dug into any of this stuff, right? The ultimate sort of skull to collect, if you're a deep state establishment that's running psyops in the American people, is to get people to completely disengage from the movement that were already active in it. So when he says there, the way he frames that and says self-aware of its own disenfranchisement, like, that's when you've truly got an enemy population completely demoralized, when you had otherwise engaged and active InfoWar people now disengaged and aware that they're disengaged.
Yeah, that's perfectly summarized. Can you read this this next part, because this is where I think his conclusion in telling what Trump needs to do now, I think this was like the basis, because it was months after this that the Q drop started, which totally started to bypass the mainstream media. While you do that, I just got to deal with one more thing with my little son over here. Be right back.
Putting him up for adoption right now on stream.
Not doing that, but hold on.
All right, I got it on my side. Conclusion for Higgins: the recent turn of events give rise to the observation that the defense of President Trump is the defense of America. In the same way President Lincoln was surrounded by political opposition both inside and outside of his wire, in both overt and covert forms, so too is President Trump. Had Lincoln failed, so too would have the Republic. The administration has been maneuvered into a constant backpedal by relentless political warfare attacks, structured to force him to assume a reactive posture that assures inadequate responses. The president can either drive or be driven by events. It's time for him to drive them. Then John here says, the Higgins memo perfectly describes the irregular warfare we've seen unfold both before, during, and after Trump's presidency. So, he speculates about Higgins being involved. One thing, this is just my personal read. My background, for anybody who somehow doesn't know, as a professional writer for a long time, whatever that means. But before I was a writer, my degree was actually in etymology. So it wasn't, I was into literature and writing, etc. But my actual expertise is in the origins of English words. So I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in the way words are put together, literally the individual words, hearkening back to their original meanings, the way that the meanings change over time. I'm really interested, as you guys have seen me go on about with somebody like Donald Trump, I'm really interested in the speech patterns people have. I'm even interested in it from the perspective of my co-hosts. Everybody at Badlands talks about things and frames their ideas in totally different ways. Some of us rabbit trail or weave more than others. But I think there's a lot of signal there. And after reading the Higgins memo, which I didn't know about until John had written about it here, and then reading the Q drops, my personal opinion is that the narrative voice and the thought pattern construction that is evident in Rich Higgins' writing is pervasive in the Q drops. I would never claim to know, of course, whether or not Higgins was involved in the drops. John, speculates here. Was he involved in the devolution operation? Was he involved in the Q drops? I'm just saying that based on having read and listened to the words and the speech patterns, etc., of Ezra Cohen Watnick and Christopher Miller and Donald Trump and all these people that we talk about in the info war, it hit me like a ton of bricks reading the way Rich Higgins puts his ideas together in terms of just the thought paths, the logic paths rather, that are evident in the Q drops. So then, to John's point, the sections of the Higgins memo that I was going to point out are the exact ones that John was just pointing out. And I think that, my former expertise in etymology and everything led me to just pin the tail on Rich Higgins as a prime voice behind the drops. But more so than the voice is all the stuff John was pointing out here, supporting narrative, just an understanding. It's you can basically read the Higgins memo sort of as a diagnostic, like a diagnosis of a sick culture, a sick society that has been successfully infiltrated. And then to your point, he comes up with the solutions. But one more point before I pass it off to you. I found that battle space line. I've lost it again, of course, but
it's after
here we
the
go.
list of media right there. Yeah.
This particular line I really like. President Trump is operating in a battle space that reflects the left's vision.
Yep.
So something we talked about before getting into the Higgins memo. Was the devolution operation successful from a psychological or narrative perspective? I think that line there, with the benefit of our hindsight now, after the 2024 election, I would say I think it was even more successful than we think in this audience, because we are so in a bubble that when we're talking about we still need election reform, like that's all good. We should keep doing that. And we're going to keep doing that because we're constantly front running, right? This whole audience is like, we want to make things better. And by doing that, you're constantly doing what Rich Higgins does in the Higgins memo, which is threat assessment. That's what narrative, that's what strategy is. Irregular warfare, it's all threat assessment. So we're looking ahead and saying, okay, even though things have gotten a lot better, our election system needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. This needs to be fixed. So we're threat assessing, which is why sometimes maybe we sound negative, this audience. But think about the battle space that Trump was operating in 2016, 2020. It was a battle space defined by the left, according to Rich Higgins. Would you say that the current battle space in the American mind is currently, in December 2024, defined by the left?
I think we're in a middle ground. So two things. One, I just want to clarify something. Did you just take credit for Rich Higgins being a voice of the Q drops?
No, I specifically said that you speculated that.
Okay, yeah. Do you remember how much shit we got when I said, like, I think it was the same people that are after us now are like, oh, they said Q died. Q is dead because Rich Higgins died. And I think he was. And the reason I thought that, it wasn't even necessarily because of Rich Higgins. It was because of his partner. Did you go into him?
No.
Okay.
Steve
his
Coughlin?
partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Steve Coughlin guy being basically a strategic communications expert, and his speech that he gave before, I think it was 2016, the calm before the storm. But no,
and even that unconstrained analytics section is interesting if you want to tell people about that, because that's after he got fired, right? He followed the template of a lot of these other NSC guys who get quote unquote fired, and then they end up in the civilian space doing stuff that looks kind of like irregular warfare, but in the civilian space, right?
Yep, 100%. It was right after he got fired from the NSC. He went here, founded this with Stephen Coughlin, and then Q drops started popping up. But anyway, so what you said there about the battle space, like my favorite example of this is COVID, because the way Trump navigated COVID and still does to this day in a lot of ways was in the battle space presented by the left. He tried for a little bit. to be truthful, with the hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and all that stuff. And the left and their battle space completely shot it. His messaging was not working in that battle space. And so he changed. He went like almost all in to taking their lines with a lot of this stuff, but he just put other people front and center to basically direct the ship. And he told the party line. Because I think an important aspect of this is him still winning the election. And he was able to subvert it enough to where a majority of the people who support Trump didn't actually take the COVID vaccine.
Right.
But we see that in a lot of ways. I don't necessarily think that the left is controlling the battle space anymore, but I don't think it's fully controlled by Trump either. And I honestly think the 2024 election is the evidence of that, because had Trump been in full control of the battle space, I think we'd be talking about how freaking fraudulent the 2024 election was too. So I think we're at a middle ground in a lot of ways, and maybe we don't get to, his battle space until, he's back in office, and maybe it's going to take the podcast presidency, like General Flynn keeps talking about, where we have people outside of the mainstream media presenting the news. Because as long as the mainstream media has some sort of outlet, they're going to be controlling some aspect of the battle space of the narrative. But it's shifted so much from where it was in 2020 to where it is now. And maybe that's through X, us being the news now. There's a lot of reasons you can look for that. But yeah, the battle space has definitely shifted. And his messaging, I think, has shifted too, because the way he talks, he talks in, some of the left battle space, and then he'll like do his asides where that's in another battle space on its own. And then he comes back to the mainstream left battle space. So we see a mix of both.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to frame it that way and say we're in a bit of a middle ground. But again, I think to me, it strikes me in hindsight rereading that section and saying, okay, Higgins is putting this together at the time as basically a threat assessment, a diagnostic. Like, he's running diagnostics. Where is the battle space of the American mind and the American story right now? And absolutely, it was defined by the left. The reason I would maybe even go a little further than you, that's why I caveated that by saying this audience, where we are, is front running the Overton window to the place where we eventually want the Overton window to be dragged toward, of what we think is normal to talk about, i.e. the truth. That's why we can talk about stuff like devolution and sovereign alliance and Q drops, etc., where, normies, even Trump supporters, aren't there. But I think that because we're so front running, we miss the progress, or sometimes it's not obvious to us, the progress that has been made. And besides Trump's deployments that you just mentioned, what struck me rereading the Higgins memo was how weakened the left's battle space. Like, forget the right's battle space, forget the America First movement's battle space. Think of the left's battle space. We're in the last couple of weeks alone, we're seeing their own media establishment basically say, you just mentioned the podcast presidency. We get a little annoyed at that because of what we see as some gatekeeping going on in the podcast battle space. But I will say that, is it better that more people are getting their news from conversations on Joe Rogan than CNN? Yeah, way better. And that's not a place that the American people were at 8 years ago, certainly not even 4 years ago. It's been exponential growth to this point in time. And I think in the aftermath, right and left, of the election in 2024, a lot of lefties are disengaging from their own battle space, even if they're not coming to ours. And I remember a few years ago, one of the things that I had said on one of the shows was, or maybe it was in an article, in order to win a psychological war, you don't need to convince the enemy psychological combatant to adopt your frame of mind. You need them to reject their own, which is actually a full circle of what I said when I was disillusioned. I was an example of a losing psychological combatant, not because I believed the enemy's narrative, but because I stopped fighting for mine, right? It's like, that's what they want. They don't care if I believe. The media is not trying to convince people like us to adopt their narratives. They're trying to demoralize you to stop fighting. And ironically, we've basically done that to the enemy media, to the point where you've got your Joe Scarboroughs and your Mikas having afternoon tea with Trump and pretty much begging their audiences to stick around. Like, that is not if you just use the word battle space as Higgins was using it and think of the left battle space, they've pretty much got to try to create an entirely new one at this point, because I don't even know what their battle space is right now.
Yeah, it's okay. So I want to say two things here. Number one, like where even we operate at Badlands, I think we operate in a different battle space than a lot of people, and that's why we get mad at sometimes at other people on social media, because I don't think we have the same playing field. Like our battle space does not get the same opportunity to reach people as other battle spaces do, if we're going to use that framing. But Higgins, in this memo, he actually lists all the opposition, and we could go through line by line here and compare where these people were now to where they were in 2020. And you can, each one of these, it's a completely different different ball game. Shoot, I just lost it. Yeah, here it is. The mainstream media, the principal mechanism for implementing narratives. Where are they at now compared to where they were 2020? Night and day. Like they're...
And dude, I mean, that's not even an overstatement. You've got Donald Trump Jr. and Elon Musk publicly joking about forced takeovers.
Yeah.
Of what was it, NBC, I think? Distressed assets.
MSNBC, maybe?
But think about that. Think about reading this Higgins memo when you wrote this article.
Yeah.
And then imagining in just 2 years that Trump is going to be joking about buying MSNBC.
Yeah.
So
Then
to
the
your
next
point,
one.
I mean, yeah.
Okay, that's number one. And we can give a million examples of the media. That's probably the most recognizable one. But number two, the academia has served as a principal counter-state node for some time and remains a key conduit for creating future adherence to cultural Marxist narratives and their derivative worldview. I was just looking up on Axios because I saw an article just Saturday where all the DEI institutions at like the colleges were going to be reversed. And like DEI is one of the big things that they've been driving at these universities. And the fact that they're basically backtracking and all that stuff is huge. Trump is talking about taking down, these universities and the endowments and all this stuff. Yeah, here we go. Colleges dismantle DEI. Colleges across the country are shutting down expensive and expansive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, some of which were put in place just a few years ago. To me, that's kind of a sign of the times when you're talking about where they're at. I don't know if you have any other examples or anything.
The other addition I would add on to academia, it's actually similar to all the Trump tariffs game theory that he's been using with Mexico and Canada. He's also threatening, this is part of Doge as well, he's threatening to not all of Trump's deployments are about doing something to the enemy. They're about taking something away from the enemy. And one of that would be federal funding to any universities that engage in DEI, right? And what is DEI? It's not just this economic stuff. It's irregular warfare. I mean, you could literally look at DEI, I do, as an irregular warfare operation meant to destabilize American society, right? With the next generation.
Yeah, who's that? The Russian guy from years
Yuri
ago with that
Bezmenov.
video. Yeah, Bezmenov.
Yeah.
Like that's basically what he talks about a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
The deep state, this is another great one because Trump is like basically promising when he gets into office to wipe out all these people. The successful outcome of cultural Marxism is a bureaucratic state beholden to no one, certainly not the American people, with no rule of law considerations outside those that go that further deep state power. The deep state truly becomes, as Hegel advocated, God bestriding the earth. So think of the Chevron deference and some of these lawsuits that happened, and then Trump getting in there and being able to take out a lot of these Schedule F employees. I mean, Trump is going to directly wipe out all these people here once he gets into office. All these positions, the Doge. I mean, that's coming. So
I love the Hegel com. I mean, that's one of the drinking games. You know, when you're a writer and you're from Higgins, I'm saying. And again, going back to what I said earlier, I'd said that John had suggested Higgins could have been involved in the Q drops and particularly the devolution operation. I had just added to it that my particular brand of retardation is the construction of words and sentences, and it just, after you had written this, the voice of Higgins throughout this and like the way he structures his logic path, it feels so Q related. Just the way the thought paths were laid out in Q feels so analogous to this. And when he mentions Hegel there, like I see that as signal, the Hegelian dialectic, that's from Hegel. So this is a guy who, I'm not even saying it's meant to be a calm. I'm saying that Rich Higgins' mind, he is thinking about things from a Hegelian perspective.
This is before the drops, by the way.
This is before the drops, right.
Like 4 months before.
He's talking about things from a Hegelian perspective, which is just such a first principles deconstruction of how to convince people of anything.
Yeah. Next, global corporatists and bankers, exploitation of populations unfettered by national protections and notions of personal morality and piety. What happened over these last 4 years with the banks, like we had all those interesting situations where banks were running down, and the fact that Bitcoin, an uncontrolled, like the banks can't control Bitcoin, and the fact that it's over $100,000 right now, that's like, I mean, that's a sign of the times right there.
They asked, did you see that clip of Putin a week ago?
No.
He was in some forum. Somebody in the chat, tell me what the occasion was. But he was being interviewed, and they were talking about Western sanctions in the aftermath of the Russian incursion. And specifically, Trump, I think last week, had put out a narrative deployment saying, if BRICS comes out with their own currency, we're going to hit them with sanctions, etc. This is what he does, I think, when he's asked about Bitcoin. So it's worth playing here.
Биткоин кто может запретить? Никто. А использование других электронных средств расчета.
Yeah, maybe I'll do the voiceover here. Who can ban Bitcoin? Nobody. And who can prohibit the use of other electronic means of payment? Nobody. Because these are new technologies, and no matter what happens to the dollar, these tools will develop one way or another. Because everyone will strive to reduce costs and increase reliability. Oh, there it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was in response to a Trump narrative deployment of saying, hey, if, he waves the big stick and says, if BRICS gets on their own currency, we're going to go to war with them with the dollar, and I'm all about the dollar, right? While Trump is also telling you he's going to create a strategic Bitcoin stockpile. And then Vladimir Putin is saying, yeah, well, you can't ban Bitcoin. So this is, again, like this, when you're talking about the bankers, look at this irregular warfare where you've got the two most powerful leaders in the world talking about Bitcoin being unbannable, and it's the thing that you never sell it, etc.
Totally agree. Democratic leadership here. Democratic leadership has been a counter-state enabler that executes, sustains, and protects cultural Marxist programs of action and facilitates the relentless expansion of the deep state. The fact that Trump will, narratively won this election kind of says a lot. The Democrats have been fairly ineffective with all the bullshit they've tried to pull these last few years. And honestly, this next one is maybe even in the process right now. I don't think we've fully seen the scope of it, but it's the Republican leadership. And I think what he says here, I'm actually going to read this whole thing because this is what I see happening, like with the rhinos in the these are basically the rhinos. Okay.
Yeah.
More afraid of being accused of being called a racist, sexist, homophobe, or Islamophobe than of failing to enforce their oaths to support and defend the Constitution, the Republican establishment accepts and enforces cultural Marxist memes within its own sphere of operations. In doing so, knowingly or not, it becomes an agent of that. These conservatives become increasingly indistinguishable from their Democratic counterparts, save that they misrepresent themselves to their constituents. Lacking the discernment to recognize their situation, they will work with globalist corporatists and the international financial interests and will likewise service the deep state. These establishment Republicans are the hard left's designated defeat mechanism in the destruction of the old regime, as well as the American ideal. Because candidate Trump publicly exposed them for their duplicitous activities, they are at risk as long as Trump can turn on them and are therefore bitter foes. Candidate Trump's success remains an ongoing existential threat to establishment Republicans. And now look at what they're doing with Trump's, like I've been saying, they're the gay HR department fighting against Trump's cabinet. Like they're at war with Trump, the Republicans and some of these rhinos in the Senate right now. And who knows what we're going to see pop up in the House. Go ahead.
Yeah, part of the battle space idea too, when you bring up the rhinos, I had made this point with regards to the rebranding that I thought Trump was doing during his second term, also known as the Devo term. In the first Trump administration, from a pure narrative perspective, the enemy, as you said earlier tonight, that Trump, I think, targeted, he really put the target on the media and the Democrat establishment. He would go to war with some establishment Republicans, like legacy ones, Bush and Cheney and those kind of people, because he kind of had to go after them in order to seize the Republican zeitgeist when he was first running. But largely, he rode the Republican story into power. It's like, I'm the Republican now, right? Like, I'm the Republican Party. The Democrats are bad. The left is destroying everything. But I really think that the targeting of Trump and team switched during the Biden administration, where he had Biden destroying the Democrat establishment from just, in a narrative perspective. So Trump to me, he didn't focus that much on what Biden was doing. He would just throw away like, hey, Biden's ruining everything. He sucks, right? But he really went after rhinos and Republicans in Congress during that era. And we've talked about a million times in the Power Hour during this the whole existence of the Power Hour was during the Biden administration, of the narrative worth of MAGA figures like Matt Gaetz and MTG and what they were doing, acting, that was Trump going to war with these rhinos. So I think another way of thinking about how Higgins frames the battle space is not just where we are, but where we've moved. So it's like Trump refocused the battle space from let's go after the Democrats to we need to clean our own house up. And now I would argue, I mean, this probably depends on your circles, but if you think of where we are in 2024 versus 2016, I think there are more people that define themselves as Trump supporters than Republicans at this point.
Mega conservatives.
And I would say that is, as a former liberal, like I'm biased, but one concern I have always nurtured is people being right by accident is a big concern of mine, of saying like, hey, yeah, I was a liberal who voted for Obama, but most of you voted for Bush. And I hope that the lesson that we take away from the Trump era isn't the Republicans were the good guys the whole time. So, and I don't think that that's what we're doing. And I think that that's why we can see the progress. Like, people are calling themselves MAGA. This is some of the brilliance of all that branding. Like, Trump wasn't saying go Republicans. He was saying make America great again, America first. Like, it's not actually a conservative viewpoint. It's a bipartisan viewpoint.
He was formerly a Democrat. He probably could have ran on the Democratic ticket, but the thing is look what they did to Bernie, just straight up stealing the election from Bernie. Yeah. He may not have had a chance in the Democratic primary to even be on the ticket. So you're absolutely right. He is not what I would consider to be a Republican. He's a mega conservative, or just a mega party. And that's part of the system here that I think Trump is eventually going to fix, like by giving the government back to we the people. It's the destruction of both parties. The two-party system we have it's counterintuitive. It doesn't work. Like, and when it's totally controlled the way it is too, I think it's stupid. And you got to expose and fix that too. So he's doing both. But yeah, this memo, man, like, yeah, you can see the change.
Yeah, it's incredible. I guess we can start getting toward the rants, but the other major thing that I took away, especially rereading part 23, Higgins is my favorite. That whole section's my favorite, but I don't know. I guess it's all these figures. There's a section in there, you're talking about Rich Higgins, but also Steve Bannon, Ezra Cohen Wadnick. Again, we mentioned earlier, Christopher C. Miller, but just even Kash Patel. You've got Michael Ellis. I guess the way I'd frame it is, especially with the benefit of hindsight, seeing how effective I think Patriot psychological operations have been, I'm genuinely close to almost in my own mind, rebranding a devolution operation as a psychological operation. I know that you've long talked about aspects of it that were a psychological operation. But man, like looking at these names, looking at what they did before, as you documented here, and then specifically after, and now in 2024, seeing some of them come back around. I mean, we did the whole show Wednesday night on Kash Patel and how, you know, he's going on Q podcast, but he's saying he doesn't want to talk about Q. And they're saying, hey, what was that recent podcast he was on where they're like, yeah, we have a hard time believing that you were seeded into these drops and now all of a sudden you're going to be FBI director. It just makes me look at all of this stuff and say, this was 99% a psyop, and these were the operators that put it together.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I don't even think it necessarily would, you know, the rebranding word is, it's an interesting one, mainly because, like, I think my series, if you read it, especially like this is the conclusion of this part 23.
Yeah.
All of those moves were a clear confirmation for me that devolution was implemented because we were in a period of irregular warfare. Like that's in here. That's what this was. Maybe we just don't talk about it enough because I think the NEFs, like, again, it's when you look for narratives or, you know, proof that the narrative warfare is taking place, it's harder to maybe find actual evidence of that than it is like, you know, okay, here's this document. Here's this document that says that they implemented, you know, this Executive Order 13961. Here's the outline of the proof that we can show you that this took place, right? It's harder to do that with the narratives, and being a more factual guy, that's naturally where my focus goes to, like, okay, show me the actual, show me the documents. But yeah, this has been a narrative warfare. The Q operation is a narrative warfare. We're competing on a daily basis in a form of narrative and irregular warfare. We're all part of this. Even you guys, like, just by sharing a link to something, you are helping compete in a irregular warfare. That's what this all is. Like, so much now can be called irregular warfare once you understand what it is and recognize that it's been going on. And that's another, like I said earlier, one of the reasons you know it's working and been successful is how many people are, like, acknowledging that psyops are going on and we're engaging in them and we're, like, winning the regular warfare. We are the news now. Even Elon Musk is saying that. That's him basically acknowledging that we've won in a lot of ways.
It means the news
portion
isn't the news anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious, but that's what he's saying.
The mainstream media is the enemy of the people, but they've lost. Like, if we are the news now, that means they've lost. So we're moving on to Trump's narrative win is the next phase of this operation, or at least right now we're in the transition period to that next phase. Maybe that's the reconstitution. I don't know, but yeah, it's fun looking at this stuff in hindsight.
Yeah, and I know did you get all the way up to these when you've been doing your recap series?
I didn't, actually, because I started that whole recap series before summer. And then, I mean, you know what happened, like, right at the beginning of summer, and it kind of threw off my entire schedule. I had my kids all the time and didn't end up happening. But I should just do these two articles.
This was a light recap. But yeah, I mean, these, again, strongly suggest you guys reread these ones. Like, we rabbit trail on this show. We didn't go, like, point by point on these. There's a lot in there. I think especially, you know, a whole other aspect that we could do whole shows on, I'm sure we will, is that, what was the name of the company that Coughlin and Higgins, Unconstrained Analytics.
Unconstrained Analytics, yeah.
Just even that whole thing. We mentioned it tonight, but it follows a pattern of this. You know, Chris probably more than anybody talks about the public-private partnerships and how that's such a root of deep state power, communist power projection. We got the Rise people in chat tonight.
Yeah,
I see. John's got his
got my sweater.
His sweater on.
On the side. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. The public-private partnerships that are one of the defining attributes of communist states and insurgencies, I think that we see so much evidence, especially in your series there, that was reversed. I mean, I really think that it makes so much sense that patriots would use that structure, I guess, that template, because you're able to hide. Well, this insurgency was in the government, right? So think about It's like trying to disarm a bomb while you're making a bomb inside of the bomb that you're already in. It's that's how you're trying to dismantle the deep state. So when you've got a reversal of the public-private partnerships thing, it shows you this template through which patriots could fight them. Because what is the deep state government going to do about unconstrained analytics? You know, they need warrants. They would need probable cause to get into the documents or to see what these companies were doing. And there's so many other versions of it. You probably could name more than I could, but off the top of my head, we've got like America First Legal. You probably think of other ones that were in your series, right? You're out. You're muted.
There's a whole list from part 13, but I can almost validate the point you were making about the insurgency part.
Mm-hmm.
But here, I'll show you at the end of part 13. It's talking about the distributed environment and the public-private partnerships. And I just look at where a lot of these key people in the series went after they left Trump's admin. And you have the Center for Renewing America with Russell Vought, who's coming back in. Kash Patel was there too. Secretary of Homeland Security.
After. Yep. These are all after 2020, right?
Yep. This is all right in the aftermath, like the immediate aftermath. Wolf Global Advisors, John Ratcliffe, like you said.
Funny, they all had immediate landing places. Like they weren't even in chaos after that period.
Yep. The America First Policy Institute, which this is a huge one, I think, now that we've seen a lot of the stuff play out.
Oh my God.
Where else? What did you say?
Boys.
Oh, it's dealing with his animals. American Global Strategies, LLC. Big One Boundary Channel Partners, Chris Miller, Anthony Tata. You have Amanda Milius, who I'm still waiting on her final documentary that she said she's going to put out. But so that's a good example of that. But let me read this from where's it at here? From the Higgins memo. One more thing, because this kind of talks about the insurgencies that you were just talking about within, like insurgencies within insurgencies in a sense. Political warfare attacks, a primer. As used here, political warfare does not concern activities associated with the American political process, but rather exclusively refers to political warfare as understood by the Maoist insurgency model. Political warfare is one of the 5 components of a Maoist insurgency. Maoist methodologies employ synchronized violent and nonviolent actions that focus on mobilization of individuals and groups to action. This approach envisions the direct use of nonviolent operational arts and tactics as elements of combat power. In Maoist insurgencies, the formation of a counter-state is essential to seizing state power. Functioning as a hostile competing state acting within an existing state, it has an alternate infrastructure. Political warfare operates as one of the activities of the counter-state and is primarily focused on the resourcing and mobilization of the counter-state or the exhaustion and demobilization of the targeted political movement. Political warfare methods can be implemented at strategic, operational, or tactical levels of operation. That's like basically a lot of what you just said.
Yeah, it's funny. And I remember like maybe 2 years ago, I was never quite able to put it into words as well, but that section kind of sums it up. But we were talking at the time about handoffs, handoffs in terms of investigations. And I had written an article at the time that was just about trying to expand that concept beyond investigations and say, have we been thinking about the word handoffs backwards? Because at the time, we were talking about handoffs. Basically, you'd have outgoing figures in the DOJ seemingly handing investigations off to incoming figures. And then I just reversed that in my mind and said, okay, we're dealing with counterinsurgency, right? To your point there. If we're dealing with a counterinsurgency and the insurgency that we're dealing with is in the government, which includes the DOJ and the military and the executive branch, we don't know how pervasive it still was during Trump 1.0, but it seems like it was pretty damn pervasive. Would you hand investigations off to incoming people, or would you do the opposite? So for me, I started to think of that as saying, these guys that were on the Patriot team, so to speak, that were in the DOJ during Trump 1.0, were actually gathering evidence in the government, but then the real progress on the investigations were being done in the private sector. as they left, because if you're trying to shield your investigations from the swamp creatures that you're working with in the DOJ and the FBI, perhaps in the IG, you know, I know a lot less about how that works than you do.
Yeah.
But you would ostensibly want to keep it in the private sector, and then you start going through all of these private sector firms, and so many of them were law firms. And then, you know, the just even the name of Higgins and Coughlin there, unconstrained analytics, where you're like, man, if you were going to be, and you know what? One more point on this. I'm interested in your take on this specific thing. The way we see a lot of these patriots handle questions about the Q drops and devolution, they could be not lying to us when they're like, oh, I wasn't involved with that. That wasn't the military. Like the way they talk around it, I've played with the idea of, well, they're allowed to say this because that wasn't the US military. It was former US military contractors operating via unconstrained analytics, or like a private, and in the Q drops, they talk about civilian military alliance.
Yep.
And I think that most Anons believed they were saying, oh, us, right? Like, we're the civilians and they're the military. But man, now I wonder, like, were they actually saying military that then went into civilian roles and back and forth?
I think we've talked even on a Wednesday Power Hour about something along those lines, and I think it makes total sense. The thing is I do believe at some point you need the actual military crossover in some ways, and that's why it's interesting that Chris Miller, you know, as he was outgoing, went to all of the combatant commanders to look them in the eyes, just, you know, get a, you know, look a man in his eyes to read his soul, or whatever, however he phrased it. It's a weird thing to say as an outgoing lame dunk Secretary of Defense. But no, I think you're totally right. A lot of the things that were going on or happening in the civilian sector. I mean, think of the DoD contract with Elon Musk and what he did in the civilian sector as that's a civilian military alliance right there.
Exactly. Like almost deputized. That's the way I would see somebody like Elon Musk. And that's why they don't have to be lying, right? Like, not that I'm saying they can't lie. This is like the age-old, what's the word? The age-old false beliefs people have about police is that, like, police can't lie to you. That's bullshit. They can lie to you in the course of a myth. Yeah, that's a great word for it. But, you know, there's a myth that police can't entrap you, because people hear the word entrapment and they're like, oh, a cop can't lie to me during a fake drug deal. Yes, they can. They can lie constantly during the course of their work. There's very specific constraints that defines entrapment, and lying to you is not one of them. A cop does not have to tell you they're a cop. They're not vampires. Like, a vampire needs to be invited into your house, and people act like, a lot of people in our community are like, well, if you ask a military contractor in a specific way, they have to answer you. That's not actually the case. But I would just add to that they also don't have to be lying to you when somebody like Elon Musk, if you were like, hey, were you operating on behalf of the military when you bought Twitter? He could say, no, I was operating as a civilian in alliance with the military, right? It's like, you still don't have to be lying for these things to hold true.
They're twisting the truth a little bit. But yeah, it still blows my mind that people, like, the fact that to this day, I'm seeing people on Twitter that are like, oh yeah, Cash said devolution's off the table, or, you know. What do you fucking expect? It still blows my mind, but it really doesn't. Whether those people are even genuine or just that stupid, I don't know. But what kind of operation would it be if any one of those people just came out and directly said, yep, I am. It's happening right now. Just don't tell anybody. No.
Yep.
Stupid.
And some of the fun stuff for me is taking that civilian military alliance framework or template and just extending it as far out as I can. And, you know, because before InfoWar stuff, I was obviously in the publishing industry and really interested in Hollywood and just movies and all that kind of stuff. And man, I look at some of that stuff. You've probably seen me talking to Chris and everything in chats about it. I think it goes far. I mean, I think that you can just trace some of those Trump connections into people like Nelson Peltz, Ike Perlmutter, the Ellisons, the David and Larry Ellison, David is now in control of Skydance. Skydance just bought Paramount Pictures. Skydance produced Top Gun Maverick, which is like the most anti-woke movie of the modern era. I think that stuff goes so far, because if you're also talking about, besides media being a part of psychological warfare, so is entertainment, so is Hollywood,
Culture.
all of that stuff.
Well, but there's a distinction I think that needs to be made. Like, I totally see what you're saying, and the evidence is there. These are connected, but that doesn't mean that those people are involved in like a Devo plan. Those people,
Totally.
those people are being told, by somebody or a friend of a friend, or maybe Trump directly, like, hey, we need you to do this. Like, just trust me. And that's probably a stupid way to paraphrase what kind of conversation that might be, but that's what's happening. Like, they're not read in on what's going on,
Totally.
and then going
Yeah.
and doing something. But it's certainly like, you have to win the culture war too, and this does extend beyond just the stuff that we specifically talk about. And you do wonder how far, like, even some of these people that we bitch and moan about, like the Charlie Kirks of the world, it's obvious that he's being told in some ways what to be saying on his shows. I get it. Like, he's more directly connected to Trump than we are. But it's still frustrating when we're operating in a different battle space than he is, and we believe that battle space we're in is the truth one, and we see like him telling people not to tell the truth just so they can reach more people. I get the arguments. I've heard it before. That stuff is frustrating, but it makes you wonder, like, why they haven't, like, they will specifically avoid us. Like Kash Patel, for instance. I go back to this one because I think it's a good example, because he will go on Q shows, smaller Q shows with smaller audience, that like 1 to 2,000, which is great. Like, I'm not trying to diminish the number of views, but whatever his goal is, like, if his goal is to reach people, like, we can give a bigger audience and talk less about some of the conspiracy theory stuff than these other people. We can talk about actuals that actually happened and like point out stuff that he was involved in directly, but he still avoids us, right? That doesn't make sense. It's
because Dave of X22, and bless his soul, I mean that, I'm not joking. I love that guy. He plays nice with them, and I mean that as a compliment. Not to say that we wouldn't play nice with Kash, but the way I've rationalized the distance of this audience, not just Badlands, but this audience with some of these patriots that we think have been involved in Devo, Q-Drop, the plan. I think of this audience as like the shock troopers of the info war. That doesn't mean we're the quote-unquote best. It means, though, that I think it's like berserkers on a battlefield. There's certain units that you just put somewhere, and you can't completely predict what they're going to do.
And you can't control them either.
You can't control them. But we know that we can't be controlled. I mean, imagine somebody like Chris Paul, for example. He has the right intention. Like, I'm saying from a perspective of patriots, they know he's a good guy. They know he's got the right intentions. They also know that if they tell him some shit, he's going to go on his podcast and be like, this is, because he's all about first principles truth, like, enough with the psyops. And I think I sometimes take it as a backhanded compliment for people like you, people like Chris, people like our whole audience. Like, if you guys pay attention, if you go to Garts, there's enough gravity that I think we don't have to worry about whether or not we've been overall over the target. Sometimes the distance, I think, is a backhanded compliment, because they're telling certain audiences, like, guys, you're doing your thing. Like, you're doing exactly what you should be doing. Just keep going over there and being chaos agents. And I do laugh sometimes when you mention some of the names that we go after in the supposedly the Con Inc. space. I mean, I've gone after, like, Pasobic is one of the ones that I go after a lot. And I'm not joking when I say exactly what you did. Like, I am entirely able to believe that he is much closer to Patriot plans than I am.
Yep.
While also saying, you know what? If he's a Patriot, he probably is laughing his ass off when I go after him, because the reasons that I am are good. It's like trying to further the awakening. These people have to know that the intention is there.
Yep. I think you nailed it. I mean, we get mad because of the first principle stuff that we think we see lacking. And I think that's that's a good thing to be upset about.
Yeah.
And I got to imagine if, if they're watching us, they like that, but there's a reason that they aren't there yet, whatever that reason is. We don't have to agree with it. I certainly don't agree with it, but I understand it. So it is what it is.
As Dr. Manhattan says in Watchmen, I
I've never watched that
understand.
before.
Oh man, you would love it. I think you would anyway. It's an all-timer. It's based
I
on a
did watch
graphic
that
novel, but the movie's
Sicario.
very good.
I watched Sicario. I did like that.
Yeah, it's good shit. Watchmen, all-timer. Watch the director's cut. Yeah. Well, I won't spoil the ending, but a quote from the ending is, "Do you understand, John?" The guy's name's John. And he says, "Without condemning or condoning, yes, I understand." That's often how I feel about the Patriots.
Spoiler alert, bro. What the hell?
Yeah. It's just one piece of it. I want to, before we go to the rants, I just wanted to end with this set us up nicely for a little bit of white pill for you guys. Have the psychological effects of the devolution operation been successful? Well, let's look at what the media establishment thinks. Goodbye to the American century. The post-World War II world order of American dominance is over. Donald Trump proves it. This is from Friday. And just briefly, here is why. Donald Trump's second presidential victory represents a sharp break and perhaps a permanent one with the American century framework. It's a framework that rested on 4 key pillars. This is how they define their system. A rules-based economic order that afforded the U.S. free access to vast international markets. A guarantee of safety and security for its allies backed by the American military might. An increasingly liberal immigration system that strengthened America's economy and complemented military and trade partnerships with the rest of the non-communist world. And finally, a picture of an America that valued and exported to the rest of the world its technical and artistic skills, engineers, scientists, doctors, developers of airlines, builders of roads, teachers, and educators. So now, obviously, that's with their framing. Yeah. But I often say in my writing, my favorite instances of narrative convergence is when the enemy's narratives could be reproduced by us almost word for word as a good thing. And they are telling you that the past 8 years, the past 4 years, whatever it is, the devolution time period has resulted in the perhaps permanent loss of the rules-based international order, also known as the post-World War II era. And if you're a conspiracy theorist or a truther, and you want to pinpoint when did this period of deep state control take hold, you would point to post-World War II.
Yep.
Eisenhower tried to keep it under control. Kennedy tried his best, and then boom, deep state basically from then on out. So
I like that. That's a good article. Can you send me that?
Yes. It's yeah, sometimes the most encouraging things are the enemy lamenting their own losses.
Oh, I love it. That's some of my favorite stuff, is them trying to come up with excuses, and then sometimes when they're like so on the nose about it, but just from the wrong perspective, it's perfect.
And that last pillar reminded me of Chris Paul, where they said that we've lost our reliance on technical and artistic skills engineers. What is that? What are they talking about? The expert class. Because they know that the American people no longer give a shit about experts. Earlier in the show tonight, you mentioned the COVID era and how seismic that was for people not trusting experts. So it's all good stuff.
Are you going to get to the rants? Because I just want to go check and see if my son's asleep. I haven't heard running feet in a while, so I'll be right back.
For anybody that heard my sons, there was a big snafu in the den where there was some sort of creature that seemed to be running about, and my cat, or at least he thought that there was a creature. So he started running about after it, and then the wolf started running about after him. So complete pandemonium. Tom Terrific 54, I read this earlier. Thank you for the support to you guys. The Q Awakening. Now that you made it to episode 3, do you get an alpha sandwich too? I should. Ash didn't bring me a sandwich last week, which I thought was pretty rude. Back quarter, yo mama. Okay, thanks for that. Brain strain again, $10. Keep on, keep it on. Appreciate you. Thank you. Appreciate you too. Zero Rugrats, 67. Well, this dude is worth a watch. Don't know if we have time for that, but sends over Cliff High. Yeah, we are fans of Cliff High here. Appreciate that. Good Goddess, $10. No offense, we've all done it, but John fell asleep while getting his son back to bed. That could have been what happened earlier. Ash, you will do what you're told. One of these days, she's going to make me a sandwich, and it better be the greatest sandwich I ever did have.
I get up there and the little
Attic art
fucker
on stage.
the little fucker is like, "Is it time to get up for school now?" It's like, bro,
Oh my god.
I haven't gone to bed yet.
He's
What
trying
are
to
you
pull
doing?
an all-nighter.
Oh, it's gonna be great. But yeah, let's go through these rants.
Jane
What is Ash
McClain-
bitching about?
I said I wanted to. She didn't bring me a sandwich when she was on the show last week, and she said I never will. Which I thought
Yeah,
was
she never
rude.
should. She never should.
How dare you? Whose side are you on? At least make me
Ash's.
3/5 of a sandwich, Ash.
I support Ash's venture right now, like to make Alpha make a sandwich. I think that's wonderful.
I'm okay with that too. Anything that's against the Fedsurrection at Badlands, the ongoing Fedsurrection.
I just want this. So yeah, we'll have to talk. We'll have to plan this out because I want it to be like a complicated sandwich. Like I want to see him fail at making a sandwich. That'd be the best part about it.
Right.
So we got to figure out something that he won't be able to,
Yeah.
to do.
Like a recognizable sandwich, but difficult. High degree of difficulty.
Yeah, like a panini, or isn't that like a type of?
Yeah, I had a panini today, actually. It was solid.
Did it seem difficult to make?
I guess you just throw a bunch of stuff in there and you press it, but then it falls apart. It'd be like a really good hot pastrami sandwich. Is that a thing elsewhere in the country? You guys eat hot pastrami sandwiches?
I mean, I don't like actively go out and seek it. So, but they're around here.
They're just around. Like, look,
You
there's
just
one
random-
now.
you just randomly come across them in your days.
Hot pastrami sandwiches, yeah. Still steaming. Kitsko, Peter Thiel tonight on Zach's show confirmed Azov was participating in J6, and they're
Peter
going after
Tickton.
Peter Tickton.
Not
Yeah, it's
Peter
like
Thiel.
he was not on. They're going after the J6 committee. He is one of Trump's attorneys. Great show, BB. Thank you, Kitsko. We do
I
not
actually interviewed
endorse
him-
Zach shows.
I interviewed Peter Tickton and what was his name? The other one of Trump's
Oh yeah.
like old buddies from back in the day. Let me find it. You keep going, Al.
Ash says she loves hot pastrami sandwiches, which would make it kind of complicated for Alpha because he'd have to like cook up some pastrami. He'd have to be nice. He couldn't dry it out. And yeah, there'd be equipment involved. I think that might be the move. Some kind of complicated pastrami alternative. Old checkerboard vans, $17 is the FDR exposure, the start to expose past presidents, says a Gateway Pundit article. Report evidence suggests FDR let Pearl Harbor happen. Yep, Pearl Harbor was a false flag. Brew, I would like to know what President Trump and Prince William discussed in their private meeting last night. Another great show, BB. Thank you. I didn't even know we met with Prince William.
I didn't
Steph
either.
Asia, 2020 and 22, Carrie Lake fought the steel like crazy. Why not this time? That is interesting. Remarkable silence around the Carrie Lake election.
It was weird.
EC was here. People who don't know the difference between etymology and entomology bug me beyond words. I see what you did there. It is exceedingly clever. Yes. Etymology is the study of how words are constructed, and entomology is the study of insects, in case anybody was wondering.
You know, they'd make that a lot more clear if they just changed the E to A. Entomology, and like I think people would understand entomology.
Entomology. Ugh, made it even worse. The Anti-Karen, $10. Really excellent show tonight. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rise Attire. John watched the interview Rug Pull did today with Trump's lawyer and childhood friend Peter Tickton. This one got it right. It's amazing. The election fraud exposure and justice for 24 is about to begin heavy.
Yeah. So it was almost a year ago, December 18th of 2023, I interviewed Peter Tickton, and then his so Peter Tickton was a classmate of Trump's back in military school, and another guy that was as well is Leo Arriaga is his name. I interviewed both of them. They showed me some old pictures and stuff. Tickton is one of the guys who's behind the Clinton lawsuit. Like he's helping Trump's team like sue Hillary. And so yeah, that was a great interview. He's a great guy. I will check that out though. And speaking of Rise of Tire, guys, this sweatshirt here for Christmas, you got to go to badlandsmedia.tv/rise. Just in the search bar when you get there, just type in Badlands and you'll see the Christmas stuff come up. I'd get on it. This thing's awesome. I got more coming. Can't wait.
It's good stuff.
And you have one too that you're not wearing, I see.
I'm not, unfortunately. But
thank you, Rise.
I will, as we get more into the Christmas season, maybe I'll just alternate between that and my Roadhouse sweater.
There you go. I'll allow it.
My last Roadhouse sweater was supposed to be a big celebration, and then it ended up being a really awful show. I busted Roadhouse out. It's like, oh, let's retire that one just temporarily.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
I was thinking that's how good a mood I was going in there. I wasn't even in a black pill mood.
That's how ready you were for violence.
Yeah, right. Until it's time. Data 12, U.S. scrambles to shape post-Assyria after regime collapse for maximum effect. Public school teachers sent in to help children become gender fluid, mutilated, injected with 72 vax, Moses not real, etc. Yep. I mean, well, Department of Education is getting got, I would say. Steph Asia, where can I find the Peter Tickton interview? Was that on Zach's own channel?
That was on Zach's channel. I didn't know if you're talking about mine. I just posted mine in the chat, but yeah, that would be on Red Pill's channel.
I mean, it's not our channel, but if you guys want to go watch some Zach stuff, I guess you can. All right, that is it. I don't know if you check the boost. I want to see if this is a caching issue with my. See if there are any from tonight for the narrative, because often what happens is I get off the show and then the next day there's rants that say they are from tonight, or there's boosts that say they're from tonight. And I was told that it might be my browser that is not updating.
What is the date?
Just in case.
Today.
The 8th would have been the date of the show.
The last ones I see here are from like December 1st and 2nd.
Really? I've got ones from the 8th, but for different shows. So yours is showing
like
December
I'm saying
1st?
for the narrative.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Just making sure. All right, good. I just want to make sure I don't lose any. If any come through and you guys are watching on replay, as always, we get those next week. Thank you for the support. Thank you to our sponsors. Tonight was EasyRx, promo code Badlands, 10% off orders of $150 or more. And then Safe Streets is our other sponsor tonight. Thank you, John, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We could educate you on devolution and refresh your memory on some devolution type stuff.
Sorry about my kid interrupting.
Just in general?
No, just interruptions. That's the only thing.
That's okay.
I mean,
at least tonight on my ranting and rambling, it made sense because it was just me for a little bit.
Yeah, so I appreciated that part.
Yeah,
you got the filibuster by yourself, where what it's meant for. It's perfect.
Right. But I can't get yellow flags for filibustering tonight because it had to. It was strategic filibustering.
Well, see, the thing is, it's your show. You could filibuster as much as you want. I wouldn't care.
See, I think that this was a Fed op where you were trying to get me used to podcasting alone. So you just kept strategically leaving. But anyway.
I could yell for my kid and have him come down here and prove he's awake if you want me to.
Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for supporting. Please hit the thumbs up button. Please share the show throughout the week if you like it. Every week we're going to try to do new guests. We'll cycle through old ones. Keep it in the info war. Keep it largely within Badlands. Maybe we'll branch out every once in a while. But only people we really like and trust. That's what we'll be doing. I will end the show with the intro because it's awesome and it should bookend things nicely for you. So remember, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. John and I will see you Wednesday night. John will see you tomorrow night. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Merlin?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. Now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through. It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not sin. I have failed you all. You forbear me. Captain Honor, I do not know what strength is in my blood. But I swear to you, I will not let the light city fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.